All right, it's 4 o'clock. Welcome to the February EIC meeting. We're going to start this meeting with an invocation led by Board Member Kyle Bond.
Please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity today to serve the community of Kerrville and its citizens. Please be with us as we make decisions today that affect our community in a positive way. We appreciate all of the blessings you provided to our community, and we pray for our state and our country and our leadership. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay, I would like to move some items around on the agenda. It's kind of for the guests that are here and also for timing, and one of our members, Greg's going to have to leave early. So unless anybody is opposed, what we'll do is we'll quickly approve the minutes, and then when we get to monthly reports, we're going to have Schreiner go ahead and give us their update. And after we hear from Schreiner, we're going to move into item 5A and 5B. Once we finish those consideration and possible actions, we'll move back and finish our other monthly reports and financials. Any issues with that? Okay, so let's go ahead and approve the minutes. I will accept a motion to approve the minutes from our, let's see, was it December? Yes, December 2024 meeting.
So
Okay.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Okay, very good. All right, so we're going to move on to monthly reports, and we're going to jump straight into Schreiner University for your update.
Well, may I present our very good friend Lucian Costley, who will give us an update on the Center for Talent and Workforce Development and the renovations to the Eddington Gym.
Thank you very much. And thank you all very much for allowing us the opportunity to speak here. We've got members of the university that have joined us today to provide this update. We're very happy to do this, of course, in person. I will say, just as a quick reminder, that our request to EIC was about a year ago, and where we requested two primary projects. One was for the development of the Center for Talent and Workforce Development, and my colleague Ben Wynn will discuss that. I will go ahead and take on the Eddington project, which was to enhance our athletic facilities. I'm happy to report that we are on target in terms of our timeline, and presently we're under budget. Now, we still have more months to go, but we are still under. Oh, okay, thank you. And so we're very happy with that. If you have not driven by campus, I encourage you to do so. Steel frames are up. The structure is starting to take shape, and the interior elements are starting to be selected. So we're very happy about that. We're also promoted these things on social media, and so we have a monthly video that I encourage you, if you're not following Schreiner on our handle, Schreiner University is our handle on Instagram, and you'll see that there. I will share before I turn it over to my colleague. Also in your packet, you'll see the economic impact to Schreiner University, this document here. This is something that we've received from the Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas. These are, of course, private institutions here in Texas, and this organization does the work that's necessary to determine what kind of impact we are making on our region, and particularly in our city. We've been conducting this type of research for years, and this is the study and results from 2024. I will point out that there are two components here. One, of course, you'll see on the left-hand side, $47 million of direct spending, and where we will see, $16 million on employee spending. That's basically the amount that the university spends on payroll and benefits, et cetera. We look at student spending, what we're spending from the students' perspective and what they're taking out into the community. Visitors, of what we're doing on campus, and how that, of course, impacts in hotels as well as restaurants, et cetera. And then, of course, university purchases. That's part of our operational budget. Anything that we're buying either here locally and, of course, outside as well, but primarily here locally. And then I pay particular attention to capital expenditures. I will say that while that's $1 million, those are projects that we have at the university. You will see next year's economic impact of how we're incorporating the construction projects, and that, of course, will grow exponentially. On the right-hand side, the $22 million, this is both indirect and induced spending. So We give somebody a paycheck, it's out in the world, they then spend it again, it's multiplied and multiplied, and according to their calculations, $81 million is what Schreiner University is providing for this region, and it's a great thing. In 2016, that value, according to NCHEMS, which is the National Center for Higher Education Management System, in fiscal year 2016, that amount was $41 million. And so in those years, we, of course, have grown exponentially. It's through your support and through your assistance, through this board and through the city, that we're able to do that, just as we're doing with these two projects that we have at the university. And so I thank you for that. So that's, of course, my report on Eddington and, of course, our economic impact. And I turn it to the Director for the Center for Talent and Workforce Development, Mr. Ben Nguyen.
Good afternoon, I'm Ben, and I'm the Director of the Center for Talent and Workforce Development, CTWD, at Schreiner University. I moved here 5 months ago from Washington, D.C. to help build CTWD from the ground up. With my background in workforce development, startup consulting, and entrepreneurship, I see this as an awesome and exciting opportunity to build this into a success story at the Hill Country with the Hill Country community. So when talking about workforce development, we're talking about real job, real careers, and real impact. Because let's be honest, we can't run the entire economy of the Hill Country with just great barbecue and scenic views. But hold on, let me take it back. Those really help. Our mission at CTWD is pretty straightforward. To develop talent and workforce pipelines aligned with the Hill Country's industrial and organizational needs, as well as statewide workforce demands. And we do that by offering educational programs in continuing education, certification, micro-credential, associate degree, and bachelor degrees. Let's talk numbers. In our first year, we are on track to recruit 85 students, with 55 students already signed up. 35 of them are in healthcare, and 20 of them are in LVN, our vocational nursing program. And this is my favorite number. 45 of our students are from right here in the Hill Country. That means we're not only training people, but we're investing in our local community. So next time when you visit a hospital or a clinic, there's a good chance that we will be helped by one of our graduates. And we're also pulling in students from outside the area, even though we're just getting started. So the momentum is real. So what are we offering? We're having 10 different pathways in healthcare certifications, covering surgical tech, phlebotomy, clinical medical assistant, etc. We've just launched business and management certifications in HR, bookkeeping, and project management. And let's not forget IT, information technology. We've just introduced network technician, security technician, and computer support programs alongside our viticulture and vocational nursing certifications. But we are not just stopping there. We are actively developing new programs in mechatronics, real estate licensing, and banking. Why? Because these industries are developing so quick, so fast, and we want to make sure that our students are well prepared to fill in these jobs. Take mechatronics, for example. Mechatronic is the technology behind automations, robotics, and advanced manufacturing. These industries are booming right now. And also for those of you who have been thinking, well, I should have my real estate license, well, we will have you covered very soon. And all of these are not happening in a vacuum. We work closely with local businesses and employers in healthcare, advanced manufacturing, hospitality sectors to make sure that our programs align well with the real workforce needs. We are forming an official partnership with independent school districts, for example, KRSD, to create pathways for our high school students. We also collaborate with workforce organizations such as Texas Workforce Commission and Workforce Solutions Alamo to provide workforce benefits, especially to the underserved populations. So it's all about connecting the dots. employers, educators, community organizations to develop a workforce development ecosystem for our local community. On the operations side, we've been busy. We've hired key personnel, a director, that's me, and an admin specialist. We have purchased and installed mechatronics equipment, and we are in the middle of a construction project to help expand our training capabilities even further. Fast forward 5 years, we plan to enroll at least 315 students and fully develop at least 10 programs. We also have plans to provide workforce professional development and continuing education programs to help upskill and reskill our working professionals and business owners in high demand topics, for example, AI, e-commerce, digital marketing. And as Dr. Costley already went through the economic impact of Schreiner University, I just want to point out that this is one of my favorite stats right here, is that our alumni stay in Texas. It means we're not only investing in our talent, but we're also, those talent are the ones who stay and developing our local community, our local economy. And with all of these things, for me, what it really means is when we talk about workforce development, we are not only talking about it, but we are making it happen. And we can't do all these all by ourselves. It's your support, your commitment, your collaboration that really makes the difference. And we really appreciate you for being an essential part of our journey so that we can make all these happen. Thank you very much for your time.
Can I ask a quick question? So at this point, do you have to be enrolled as a full-time Schreiner University student in order to participate in these in this program?
Thank you for your question. So right now, the students don't have to be enrolled as a traditional full-time student because the majority of our students through CTWD are non-traditional students.
Okay.
They can be high school graduate, they can be working professional, they could be single moms, working parents, and we want to make sure that we have a pathway for them through these programs so they can upskill and have a better career to support themselves and their families.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
I have one. So you'll start in the fall? Is that when or have you already started in these healthcare programs? Do you already have students enrolled in that, or that will be starting in the fall of 2024?
Our healthcare, the number that we showed earlier, counting from September 2024.
So they started last fall.
We had some student before, but to be on the transparency side, we want to make sure that we count it from the day that we officially started CTWD is in September 2024.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're now going to leave monthly reports, and we will return to them after we finish our consideration and possible action. Agenda item number 5A, the consideration of a funding and economic development manager as a city employee through an amendment to the administrative services contract between the City of Kerrville, EIC, and City of Kerrville, Texas.
Sorry, I just put a mint in my mouth. I wasn't expecting this. Sorry. All right, Chair, members of the board, Dalton Rice, City Manager. So a couple months ago, we had brought to you, kind of planting the seed a little bit, about an economic development manager and what that position potentially would look like in the City of Kerrville, and kind of the differences between the EDC. Real quick, I do want to give a shout out to Todd Bach real quick, who's in the audience. Hello, Todd. He is the interim executive director currently for the EDC. And he's been really helping the EDC out, filling some big shoes. So, going through kind of our slide deck, this is obviously a pretty busy slide. It's not meant to necessarily be read, but what I want to show on here and really future slides for just City Council and the public in general is this is City Council's priorities. So City Council in roughly May, June of 2024 sat down, collaborated with our teams, both directors and our senior executive team and council, and kind of worked through our 2050 plan. So these priorities come directly out of the 2050 plan. And while there is a lot, there's technically 8 key priority areas. We narrowed them down to 6 technically, but we took subcategories out of each one of those, and we'll talk a little bit more in details and specifics of how this applies to the request today. So I am not a graphic designer, and I did not get this to Martin or Stuart Cunus in time. But during our EDC strategic planning retreat that we did a couple weeks back, there was kind of a picture of an umbrella. So I want you to imagine an umbrella, which is the economic development umbrella. And under that, what comprises or what makes up economic development is community development and business development. And each one of those plays a really vital role in economic development within our community and even in the outskirts of our community or region as a whole. I won't read them verbatim. I'll kind of let you just kind of look through that. But there is a lot of overlap, and I didn't want to specify one versus the other because it's not necessarily a comparison. We'll kind of talk through those as questions come up, but really want to focus mainly on how this benefits the city of Kerrville and what the intent and the goal is. I really like this slide, even though it is
on this slide before, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
What this umbrella came from what?
So this is actually taught kind of in economic development.
Okay, so it was not a result of your retreat. It was
No,
it's
this
more
is
of
not a result of the retreat.
theory.
This is kind of how we define economic development as a whole. So when we say economic development, you can kind of break it down into these categories below between community development and business development.
Okay.
So you're not saying that the city is looking at doing more of the community development and the KEDC is more of the business development?
And this is where it gets kind of complicated, right? Because there is a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap between the two. For example, both would do business retention and expansion, but how we go about doing that, I think, is where the differences lie. So the city already does a lot of community development. Infrastructure, EIC does a lot of quality of life, the $20 million bonds. So there's a lot of things that we as a city function are already doing in the economic development sphere. And how do we make that better? How do we improve some of those amenities or services that we're looking for? And again, what's the difference? This is not trying to take over EDC. This is trying to offset and do something different that we're trying to focus on with City Council. So that kind of goes into this. A little bit more busy, but talking the difference between community, successful business, economic developers. I really like this slide because when you look at community, it shows a lot of the things that we're already doing. Some of the community development side, public safety, housing funds, quality of life. EIC has played a large role in all of these these different areas using sales tax dollars, right? Not general fund or property tax dollars, but sales tax dollars. And how does that play a role in successful businesses, whether that's retail or whether that's, we'll call it primary jobs, which is the larger scale, such as James Avery, who have played a pivotal role in this community and what those differences are. So why is this economic development manager critical? When we start looking at the retail side of things, so retail versus primary jobs, the restaurants, the small businesses, the chamber has about over 800 members, just in the Kerrville Chamber of Commerce alone. How do we tap into that? How do we find out what these businesses need? Whether that's locations, whether that's what are are they hurting on jobs? Do we need more housing? Do we need more workforce? Is there a talent workforce issue that we need to address? Building those relationships with that community. This dedicated person would be able to, and the goal of this is to build those relationships within the community to find out what those needs are and help tackle both the 2050 plan and the economic development objectives, but also tackle some of the small business, small business issues that are out there or the small business needs are out there that we just don't know. A great example of this, I don't know if y'all know, we got a ramen place right there off of Coley and Thompson. I found out about it through my wife a week after they had opened. So there's a gap. There's a missing piece that we want to be able to promote these businesses from an economic development standpoint, but we just don't have the relationships or the capacity to be able to do that in-house. And we technically already have an economic development arm. Michael Horness was actually hired on to fill a lot of that role. Unfortunately, that there's just been a gap, within that due to all the other projects and everything else, $80+ million worth of stuff that we have going on in the city. So this also aligns with City Council's strategic goals. Again, EDC has a different function. City Council also has a large role to play in this, of course, City of Kerrville. And so how do we tackle those objectives within there, which is right here? So priority 4 and priority 6. Again, these are just a small snippet. These are what actually City Council had kind of, and the senior executive team have put dots on, or kind of in the matrix process, that they found that was important, at least for the next couple years. And again, every couple years, this is potentially going to change based off of needs or based off of trends that we're seeing. But these were the ones that were picked in May. And when you start, I don't want to read these off the slide, but again, these are things that EDC is not necessarily supposed to tackle. This is where the EIC and City of Kerrville ultimately has a responsibility to kind of tackle some of those objectives, where the EDC as itself is kind of more of a broad stroke. And even though I've only showed these two, the downtown revitalization and economic development, as we saw in one of the previous slides, community development is a large role in that. Talent workforce development, as Ben kind of touched on, is a large role in that. There's a gap in our small business of who needs what, how can we help you? Not necessarily government intervention, but just building those relationships so we can kind of determine and bring back to council some of those needs that may be prevalent. So again, we already kind of talked about the role a little bit, business retention and expansion, business attraction, downtown and Main Street. So we do have a Main Street Advisory Board. We do have a TERS #1, Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone, that encompasses a large area of, it's really the downtown and actually a greater area. Some of the marketing side, and when we say marketing, that's really relationships. We don't know what we don't know. And until we can get boots on the ground, this is not a phone call. This is not something we can post on the website and say, hey, we would like, information on this. These are boots on the ground. Folks got to get out there and build those relationships. And one of the things that we had talked about with council, and this was prior to May of last year, so before the election a little bit, one of council's big objectives and something we had brought up to, and I've actually been talking about it with Michael since I've been here, is how do we provide some incentives? What incentives could we provide? Could we do a facade improvement grant? Could we do, an aesthetics grant, or any different number of types of grants that, whether that's EIC or City Council feels important, where if Dalton Rice has a business, anywhere in the city, and we say, hey, we want to do a facade improvement grant, and we'll match it with funds, so that way you can improve the curb appeal, improve the aesthetics, give you that little extra bump. Cities really all over the state are doing something very similar to this, whether that's through EIC or their version of EDC, or a hybrid version that we're kind of looking at of bringing it in-house and having that collaboration. Again, we already kind of talked about the key responsibilities. If I had to sum it up in 2 words, it would be relationships and collaboration, because we're not trying to create the silos. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We are trying to add another component to the economic development spectrum, focusing a little bit more heavily on the retail and small businesses, which is not an area that the EDC is particularly focused on. So I've kind of, talked to each one of y'all at different times, trying to address some of the concerns with some of the solutions. So duplication of efforts. What is the difference between EDC and this function? Well, I think the big difference is focused on, we'll call it the big stones versus the little stones, retail versus, the bigger relationships. We don't necessarily need to get involved in the state or the region, but EDC can and as they should, and keep those relationships, those long-term relationships with Megacrete, with Killdeer, with James Avery, with some of our larger employers, and really us collaborate internally to focus on the retail and small business, component. Repurpose the EDC manager for other city, functions. full transparency, we did have a senior management analyst at one point. This was right about the time that I got here. They started before me. Their focus was supposed to be hired and focused on the Main Street Advisory Board of the Main Street program. At some point along the way, it started getting kind of realigned or shifted in responsibilities. And that's one of the reasons for me. One, the title is important. We want to keep it on economic development, manager. Yes, while the title is one thing, I think the way we're going to overcome that is through communication with the EIC board. If there's EIC funding involved, y'all have a lot more say, in if things are noticed that are, not driving or not going well, we could have that conversation. But I think the key in this is communication and how do we report back with measurable information and how this benefits. Like anything, we could always pivot if need be. Stakeholder resistance, when we say stakeholder resistance, I think across the board, from the county to KPUB to EIC as stakeholders, the resistance, on this, how do we overcome that? Again, communication, how do we identify that long-term impact and what is the difference? Again, I go back to collaboration. Collaboration is important. Going to the last one is we don't want to create those silos, and that's why communication and collaboration are so important with this, because the goal is not to say, well, how do we differentiate between the two? Well, we don't want to. That's the whole point. Whether they call the economic development manager, whether they call EDC, we want these two groups, or we want these two people to focus on the economic development of it. We just have a person that is really focused on the internal workings of the city, working closely with EDC for the large economic development picture. And again, I think setting clear expectations is important. And how do we have those lines of delineation to figure out what those expectations are? So cost breakdown, I put an asterisk by the mid-range salary on there. We pulled a pay grade 38 for the city side of things, which falls in line with really that manager type role. We're just putting the mid on here. Ideally, we're not bringing somebody in at this rate. We just wanted to put the mid in there. Benefits, reason why it's such a specific number, benefits are typically about 30% of salary, with a total request of approximately $120,000. So what I'm asking for today is for EIC really to cover the salary and benefits in full without taking away from the EDC's contribution. And we kind of talked a little bit back and forth at one meeting of, well, do we really want to rob Peter to pay Paul? And I think the answer is no. I think that's a great approach to it, where let's not do that. EDC is kind of in a transition period. They're working through, we are working through a bunch of, direction. The strategic plan really kind of helped us provide some of that direction, and we have both Todd and Greg Appel to kind of speak to some of that. And really, we wanted to come with the full ask of saying, hey, we think both of them are vitally important. And at least as we go through the transition, over the next year, keep the full funding for EIC to EDC and fund this on top of that. Again, it's better to use sales tax dollars to fund sales tax improvement initiatives versus general fund dollars or ad valorem dollars. More than likely, and again, with the with the city's EDC contribution, the $68,750, we would want to reappropriate that, not to general fund activities, but to keep that general fund money or dollars and appropriate that to EDC or economic development initiatives and give that person an operational budget. There is some great opportunity that we can, from the city side, leverage resources within the city to offset some of the EDC's costs, so more in kind versus more monetary. A great example, EDC board recently had voted on bookkeeping services, and the city is going to take on those bookkeeping services, and really we can do those as an in-kind service, especially if we get this position, by being able to roll that into functions that we're already doing within the city, for the EDC and for EIC. Timeline on this, we are looking at trying to kick this position off prior to the budget year end. So really March, April is ideally what we would like to kick this position off on. Again, there's, we had talked a little bit about, and I think some of the concern was, about EDC and the momentum. Well, hate to say it right now, the momentum's lost. Momentum is gone. So how do we kind of, kick this off and get somebody in there? Because it's going to take potentially 30 to 60 days to hire somebody, depending on the direction that we go in funding. How do we start, getting that momentum back as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible? And I think we can do that. Ideally, the operational reallocation, so from the city to the EDC, we would not look at requesting from council to do that until the end of budget year. So that way, EDC would continue to keep operating their current budget. More than likely, they will end up in a surplus this year just due to salary savings. And so I know that's a lot of information, but again, talking with each one of y'all, on some of the different concerns, what questions do y'all have, and how can we?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is I want to get you to give me some basics, and then I'd like to start with Greg, and so we'll let Greg kind of ask your questions and then go down the line. But to get started, first, what is the current EDC budget, and who's contributing to that?
So the current EDC budget is $550,000 a year, about 391-ish thousand. Correct me if I'm wrong, Trina. Is from EIC to EDC.
How much did you say?
About $391-ish thousand.
I think it's less than that, isn't it? 343.
343. All right. Sorry, I was close. I'm city manager, not a finance guy. 68,750 is coming from the city to EDC general fund. 668,750 is coming from the county, and 68,750 is coming from KPUB, and that comprises.
Okay, so right now we're funding the majority of that, and your ask is that we continue to fund at that level.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question on the budget. So give me a rundown of KEDC budget timeline, EDC budget timeline, and city budget timeline.
So EDC budget timeline, they are on a November 1 to October 31st. Is that correct, Todd? Yeah, I think, okay, so we're a month off. So they're November to October. City and EIC is October to September.
Okay, so when does EIC approve their budget that then gets approved by city council? We're backing way up until like what, May, June?
Yeah.
Is that right?
July.
Okay, so we're June is when it gets presented. July is when we approve in general. Okay, so just so we get kind of an idea of when we're going to have to. I know you said you want to start before then, but just what the budget timeline is for us.
Oh, yes,
okay,
ma'am, great question.
So those are just for baselines. I'd like to just give everybody, what we'll do is just give everybody an opportunity to ask all the questions that you have. And then after we get through the questions, we can just kind of open it back up to any additional questions anyone has, if that's okay. So Greg, are you okay starting with that?
So forgive me, I'm a banker, not a city manager, so I'm going to talk finance a little bit. So when we approved the 2023 quality of life bonds, our committed budget went to about 61% of our projected annual tax revenues. So that's obviously quite an increase over what we've had in the past. And those are ongoing year in, year out commitments. About 577,000 of our budget, which is about 11%, 12%, goes to KEDC support and city administrative services. So I'm already a little bit concerned about our level of commitments that are just every year stuff that we don't have available to do grants, to do additional quality of life, to do incentives for companies to move here. Whatever those may be, they're going to continue to come up. The community's going to need those. And so I'm sensitive to how much of our annual budget we commit to. Regarding KEDC, you're asking for $120,000 a year for this, which would be in addition to the $343,000 that we're currently supporting for KEDC. And you're right. And we can talk at length about the transition that KEDC is going under right now. Obviously, we've had major staff turnover. It's kind of a rebuild, and what that budget is going to look like going forward, I really don't know. I think there's probably strong opportunities that could be reshaped in a lower amount. But right now, we don't know what that is. We haven't gone through that process. We really haven't talked that through. So I'm gonna, for the moment, just take the assumption that that budget stays the same at 550. If the city drops out, I'm very concerned about what the other stakeholders are gonna do. And I think you and I both know that there's at least reason to be concerned or questioning whether those very consistent supporters and stakeholders that have been supporting KEDC since it was founded, if the city takes off, KPUB takes off, the county takes off, and all of a sudden it's not $68,000 a year that KEDC is losing, it's $200,000 a year. And who are they going to come to support their budget? They're going to come to the EIC. So where we're currently $343,000 just for EIC, you're talking about the potential of $550 for all of KEDC's annual budget, plus $120,000 for the city's spot. And to me, that's just not doable. That's too much overhead for EIC to take on. It constrains our ability to do grants in the community too much, which, at least for the next few years, is very thin already. And so I've got some real budget questions that leads me to wonder, is this the right time for us to be considering a $120,000 new commitment before we even know what our commitment's going to be or what the ask is going to be from KEDC going forward? I definitely see opportunities for both to coexist. As I understand the city position, I'm on board. I think there's a need there. I think the way we've kind of generally discussed this position and working cooperatively with KEDC and having KEDC focus on primary job creation, particularly among our larger employers, makes good sense. And I think the city can hit some needs that haven't necessarily been hit. So I don't want my comments to come across as being I'm against what the city's wanting to do or these priorities. What I do have some issues with is until we get these numbers figured out, is this the right time for EDC to say, yeah, let's take this on, knowing that the city's going to drop off on KEDC funding. So those are my primary concerns. I think I might have asked Mike earlier, but EIC's charter, as I understand it, is that from economic development perspective, our funding ability is to go towards primary jobs. And if primary jobs are not the primary focus of this position, I've got a legal question about whether the appropriateness of EIC funding this position if it's not for primary job creation. So that's kind of my little soapbox from a KEDC EIC perspective.
No, appreciate all the comments and a couple of points on there. And again, I know timing, that was going to be my biggest thing as well as the time right. Right now, and again, I can only speak from the city manager side, so I'm only going to give city manager opinions on this. As far as I'm concerned, as of right now today, EDC functions are dead. They're dead. And we're obviously going through a transition. We're trying to figure out what that looks like. When we talk kind of about grants and recruiting, and using EIC funds to kind of do that, and how does that look? If we don't have anybody that can go and recruit and go and do those things and go and build those grants and go and try to find those folks, the money's kind of just sitting there not doing it. We actually, on the financial update, there's actually kind of a good news story in some of this too, as far as the funding. And Michael was going to kind of talk about it, so I won't talk the numbers specifically. But when we had talked about fund balance before, we didn't include investments, because investments in the eyes of accountants and bankers and financial folks don't count as cash, right? So there's actually more money technically within the EIC's coffers than just kind of, we'll call it the $1 million, because there's stuff that's in short-term or laddered investments that they'll kind of talk about a little bit more. So there's actually a little bit more money than initially anticipated, because some of that's rolled out. We just had not really done a good job at communicating that. But Michael and Trina and Julie will talk a little bit more about that. As far as kind of the funding, as far as dropping off, again, obviously nothing's ever certain, nothing's ever known. I think the county was always kind of in limbo. We haven't had really, communication with them, so we don't know. We haven't heard anything negative about it yet. I think there's still a positive relationship there. As far as KPUB, I have talked to some of their folks, and again, it's words, but I've gotten reassured that even if the city pulled out to, again, focus on some of the more internal side, that KPUB would not pull funding off that. Again, it's only word of mouth, and having talked to folks directly, but I do have confidence that I think that they would keep some of that funding. Again, we're asking kind of the in full, or the entire amount of the 120. Even if we only funded a portion of it, I think there's still flexibility in there. So from a numbers and a banking standpoint, even though I'm not a banker, I like numbers. It's a hard pill for me to swallow from the city side and even going to council of using property tax dollars to the tune of $69,000 to fund sales tax driven initiative when we have multi-million dollars within the EIC. So the general fund dollars are being used, to EIC, but those are property tax dollars doing that.
Dalton, regarding the investments and the reserves, we have forward commitments on funding of existing projects, so we need to have those reserves
Absolutely.
available for. We've got requirements in our bond covenants that require us to keep a certain level of reserves. We've done long-term cash flow studies that look at those issues and make sure that we maintain above a surplus above, and we are being, I think, prudent with how we're looking at that. But the reality is that it is thin, especially for the next couple of years. And really until we get the first round of bonds paid off 5 years, 6 years down the road, it's going to be nothing like what we've been able to enjoy the last 10 years. So it is somewhat a new day in terms of our available spending capabilities in EIC. And, the only way we get through that is to get some of these bonds paid off or, have a couple of years where we don't really do much in the way of projects.
No, absolutely. No, I understand completely. Thank you.
So I guess my question, are you ready for me to take over?
Mm-hmm.
My question, if you're pulling that 68,000 out of the EDC, would that not then fund more than half of this person's position?
Potentially. So again, when, kind of on the initial meeting, I think you had actually brought it up, was why rob Peter to pay Paul? So we said, no, you know what, let's just go ask for the moon, and then we can see what happens. If EIC says, we feel more comfortable only paying half, then yes, ideally we would use that other half to keep it with, my goal is to keep that 68,000 no matter what into economic development functions, whether that's in kind or physical or monetary. So yes, yes, sir, absolutely.
My second question is, how do we measure, what are the benchmarks for success for this position? How do we measure the impact that this position is going to make and will make?
No, that is a question of the hour, and I think it's a two-part question. Number one, I think that's where collaboration with the EDC, really comes into play. Sitting on the EDC board, I asked the same question: how do we measure the success of that? And I think we're in the same boat on both sides, where this is the perfect opportunity for us to come together and collaborate to figure out how do we measure and define success on both we'll just say in the economic development sphere. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but yes, those are things that we absolutely have to establish on both fronts, both the EDC front and we'll call it the economic development manager front. But in the economic development sphere, I think we really need to identify those.
Okay, can you go back to the slide, Martin, the one that is about that's the one you were just on it. Yes, thank you. All right, so I agree that this is a necessary or a needed position. I won't say necessary, but needed position. So I'm not coming at it from the perspective of having you prove up why this position is needed. I get that part. The more I think about it, the more I think to myself, we're in a position to fund an ongoing staffed position, but yet this board's going to turn over every year. And yeah, you can put an agreement in front of us, a 5-year agreement, and it's not going to exceed this or that, But the truth is, every year you're going to be faced with the same thing that KEDC is now faced with. You're going to be looking at this board and asking them to fund salary and benefits for an employee, almost like asking for a grant every year. And I just that feels very strange to me, that the city that we would be funding a city employee and their benefits, and putting the city in a situation of, having to request those funds. And as we discussed, and as you addressed here, the first year that I was on city council, there was a position, I don't remember what that position was named, and we had a discussion about that. And that was exactly what happened. Was that person was going to be doing Main Street grants, and then they were going to be, working with businesses, and then all of a sudden they were doing something completely different, and then that position was effectively eliminated. With KEDC and an independent board, you've got a body that is looking to constantly reinforce and direct the vision. So it's a little bit different, and we have a member of EIC that participates as a board member on KEDC, making those decisions on how to direct that role. We turn over $120,000 to the city, and we give up all control. Yes, they can come and they can report to us, and but are what controls do we really have? Not that I don't think anybody on this board wants to be a micromanager, but once we turn over that money, that's under the direct control of the city, and there's not really an oversight other than getting reports back. So to me, that's kind of a concern, and I would think it would be concerning for a general fund budget to be kind of like, it's almost like getting a grant every year for a position. I know KEDC is a little bit different, but I don't know that we've really designated funds to staff a position. The money that we give KEDC, of course, it's going to staffing, but it's a full budget of activities. So,
And really, sorry.
No, go ahead,
And really, the way that we would clean it up from the accounting side would be, through the administrative transfer. So we already do an administrative transfer from EIC to the city. This would really just fall into an administrative transfer and increasing that administrative transfer.
I understand that part about it.
But yes, you're right. As far as control, one of the things that's very unique here, and I don't know if y'all have done any research on EDCs from other cities, various sizes. City of Kerrville is very unique. We have an EIC that funds an EDC. Typically, the sales tax dollars go right into the EIC, and the EIC actually is the one that hires and brings everybody in to do all of the economic development functions, within it. Similar to kind of probably the old EDF back in the day, but you don't see typically a mediary, a funding vehicle, if you will, which is y'all, fund other outside stuff. It's usually that EIC would be the one that is hiring and firing, bringing those people on board, and doing all of the economic development functions within a city. So this is very different. So yes, in a way, we are having to kind of sell ourselves, and kind of ask every year. But I think that's also the checks and balances within what we're trying to ask. I wasn't here during that time. And so I'm big on checks and balances. I'm big on that accountability. How do we have that accountability? How do we have those checks and balances that, yes, it is a report and we got to trust the report, but at the same time, this is more for the city council side, as a city manager, I serve at the pleasure of council. And if it's no longer pleasurable, show me the door. So there's a trust factor in there. And I think we get those through metrics. We get those through, reports and data. And then we have to decide, as a board, do we trust that data? Do we trust those reports? So, yeah, I don't have a good answer for you on that other than communication, collaboration, and transparency.
Yeah, I understand. On the budget side, it was really a hard pill to swallow to hear fund KEDC at the same level, and then fund a new position, for the city of Kerrville, when we don't have. We've never had assurances, and it's always been a difficult part of EDC is to make sure that all the stakeholders are still on board and still at the table. I do share the same concern that Greg brought up. If we do decide okay, let's commit at the same level. But all of the other strategic partners know that we're not going to be doing the same level of services at EDC based on this model. And that currently we don't have, we're not paying salary to a director, that there's gonna be savings there. So why do we need to participate?
So I will actually disagree with you that respectfully, and
Okay.
only because the retail side is not even being touched right now. EDC has not reached out to the, and I'm saying
No,
reached out. So yeah, we're not even touching the retail side of it.
I agree
So
with
this
that.
is a complete gap.
I'm talking about EDC budget specifically.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so if you're looking at EDC and arguably some of those duties would be transferred, perhaps, or shared.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say not even that, let's say it stays exactly the same. Then we at least have the savings for right now that would allow EDC to function. I've heard it said that EDC is probably going to be able to function at a lower level once it's all figured out.
Yes, ma'am.
So if I'm sitting here as another stakeholder seeing, oh, well, these guys are just gonna foot the bill, I mean, why do we need to participate at this point? That's one of the beauties of EDC, right, is just having that participation by all of these stakeholders that are, currently involved in that. And we don't have that communication that y'all have it at EDC level where
Yeah.
you have a feeling for what the stakeholders are saying or feeling or thinking. And so I don't know what assurances that we would have, if any, that contribution would continue, especially with the city pulling out, like Greg mentioned.
I guess I asked the board, how would y'all want us to kind of help facilitate that? Would letters of intent, what would be a good idea for us to communicate, that the stakeholders in there, so y'all get the information that y'all need to make decisions?
Dalton, ideally, as I consider this, I think a starting place is a next year KEDC budget. We imagine what KEDC will be going forward. What does that look like? What are the staffing needs? What budget requirements is that going to be? I can imagine it being significantly less than what it is now, but I don't know. We haven't gone there yet, and we're still sort of at a pretty high level as I consider it, in terms of what do we want to focus on? What's our what are we going to be doing going forward? And so I think as we continue to focus that more and then are able to build a budget around that, we'll have a better idea of what do we need. And really and truly, I think you go through that annual cycle with the stakeholders to see what you got to work with and see if there's going to be people that pull out, because no matter who you talk to, at the end of the day, it's going to be the county commissioners, KPUB board, and city council that end up making that final decision. And you don't know until the meeting really what's going to happen with those boards. But I'd love to see a full KEDC go forward budget. I'd love to see all the stakeholders step up and show their hand and say what are they willing to do? Are we going to keep the same percentages? Are we going to shift that around some? And once we figure out what that's going to look like and what EIC's going to be faced with in ongoing funding for KEDC going forward, then I think we're in a much better position to understand what we can afford to spend towards this position with the city. That's my thought. And I know that that's not the time frame that you'd like, but to me, that's what makes the most sense.
And I think the timeline is flexible. I just think, and I guess if I had to put some, words on it, I think we're trying to compare, even though we're trying to, again, keep the lack of silos, we're trying to, not, have compartmentalization. I think we're trying to look at apples and oranges, and I think we're trying to tackle two different things. One, we're trying to say, what's the future of the EDC look like? But I think it's at the stake of, well, okay, what do we need to do within the city limits to tackle retail, to tackle a completely different function, if you will, of the of economic development. And I think to the Madam Chair's point, about, each year it's going to kind of be, a sell, right? We have to persuade, stakeholders potentially, and I think it's kind of been an ongoing, I guess, fear. I think that the same having to go to EIC and saying, hey, how do we sell our case? How do we sell this position? How do we do this? I think if we kind of base it around each year that we're going to constantly have to, worry about Commissioners Court turnover, KPUB turnover, city council turnover, I think we're always going to be faced with those uncertainties. And I think really for us going forward, we just have to kind of decide, what do we want to do? How do we want to, get there and go from there? So one of the big reasons why I said, if we fund the moon now, as KEDC kind of works through those things and we figure out what that looks like, both from the in-kind side versus, the monetary side, more than likely, no matter what, just kind of full transparency on the board, even if this position doesn't get funded now or even at the annual cycle, I'm likely going to request to pull funding, from it, no matter what. And the reason why is we're using ad valorem property tax dollars and already a very tight ad valorem budget to fund sales tax initiatives when we have sales tax dollars going to the city of Kerrville. And we could talk more about that later, but and again, this is all going to come out in budget and it could get denied, but just from a city manager request side of things, we are likely going to pull the funding.
What percentage of the city budget is ad valorem and what percentage is sales tax?
So
generated?
right now our general fund budget is about $37 million. We have some enterprises in there that are going to be rolled out. So what is about 13 million, 14 million if we
About 12.7 million, so about 31% of our FY25 budget.
Yeah, so we're cleaning up some of the.
And how much is in sales tax?
Right at 10 in general fund,
10 million for sales tax?
give or take.
Yeah. So we're.
But wouldn't that retail person bring in new sales tax to the city? I mean,
Yes.
isn't it possible that if they're good, that they'll generate the sales tax revenue to offset the cost?
Yes, but that'd be going into sales tax, and yes, that's part of the general fund, but there's a portion of that also that goes to, EIC. So again, when we look at EIC, we're looking at economic development. Why would I use
City
general
gets
fund
a
to
bigger
fund?
percentage than EIC does, so.
Well,
It'd be
potentially.
easier for the city to recoup the cost than it would be for EIC to do it.
Well, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, and I think it depends on how we look at it. So I look at EIC, economic improvement or economic development. If we're bringing somebody on that's bringing in new sales tax, that's more of an EDC function or EIC function than it would be a general fund. I
don't know that
it's
that's
six in one,
true,
half dozen in
Dalton,
the
when
other.
you look at what our charter is and what we're, quality of life, infrastructure, and primary jobs are the three things. Having increases in sales tax is not necessarily part of our primary charge. Even though I agree with you, it's economic development, it helps the community. I don't know that that's necessarily EIC's charge.
No, I understand. I think you can look at it a few different ways.
I'm probably the least educated of this group, and it's gonna take a long time to figure out. I guess the best way to say it is, I can't explain to the public what you try to present to us. Which tells me, one of the things that I like about the way it's structured is that there is a separation between the city and the sales tax, so that we deal with a simple bundle of money and administer it pretty cleanly. Everything you presented, in my mind, fuzzes those lines. And I do have concern also about, we're pretty tight for the next few years.
Thank you.
So I'm not clear about what's happening at KEDC, like what's now the general idea? Are they wanting to replace the two people that left and keep on the same philosophical track? Or are they wanting to find someone that's a good fit that may have a different philosophy of how they want to approach economic development for Kerrville? So I'd like, if you have anything around that, I'd like to kind of hear what's going on.
The only thing I have is yes.
Oh.
So there's a lot that they're in transition. The EDC board is trying to figure out kind of what that next step is. I think to the point of what Greg has kind of talked about, a lot of it is focused around primary jobs. It's focused around, we'll call it the big stones. not necessarily retail and the small businesses, the bike shops, the mom and pop shops, the downtown stuff, Main Street. So yeah, I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of uncertainty in where the EDC is going.
Is it okay if I ask Greg or Todd if y'all want to, if y'all have anything to add to that or not? Up to you.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Todd Bach, Kerr EDC, 155 Leaning Tree Lane.
I'm being official.
Yes to everything. Just like Dalton had said, and I think, after our last board, we had a retreat, and I think we walked away probably with as many questions as each of you have here, and the question of yes to all of your questions is yes, it is all on the table. It is all open. And we are literally just a couple of weeks into figuring this all out. We hope to have a report back to us from our retreat, I believe.
By March meeting.
Maybe by the March meeting, March 3rd meeting, which will shed a little bit of light on for the board, so that we can look at and kind of make a decision as to what we continue to do, what we do not do, what the city's going to do, and how we incorporate those two roles together as to not overlap, but also not work separate from one another. I mean, one of the big things, that I've felt through our economic development process over the last 20 years is to continue, even to the public, as you said, how do I explain this? We struggle with that today after 20 years and a reorganization in 2011. That how do we, it was very refreshing to hear all of the questions you all asked, because those are exactly the same questions that the board, we're asking ourselves internally, and trying to communicate that back out to our stakeholders and then back out to the public is going to be some of our challenges. And I also will echo what Dalton says. I am currently sitting in a position to basically oversee day-to-day operations. EDC as we know it is dead at the moment. We are not actively seeking, pursuing anything. I am following up with phone calls, following up with existing leads, and continue to work with our existing prospects and MegaCrete and so forth, so that they know that we're here and they know that the doors are open and that we are in business. But we are trying to identify all of those same concerns that each of you are bringing up, from budget size to operation size. How many employees do we need? And I'm helping doing and assessing that, because I've seen the budgets work, I've seen them not. How do we measure all this? There's some software that helps measure all this. Dalton and I have been looking into another city's EDC processes, and I was very intrigued by how they're tracking some of their success through some software that I'm going to demo this week. And so.
Have you guys initiated the recruiting process to find a replacement for Gil, or are you waiting for that?
No, and the reason we did, and Greg and I talked about this too the other day, we don't know what we would advertise. As what is your role, what is your responsibility, what is needed from you, what are your skill sets you're going to have to bring to the table for KEDC. So at this point, we have not put anything out to recruit or identify until we internally as a board, and obviously at the end of the day, you stakeholders and community can identify what it is our primary role is going to be. Then we can go out and revisit that and see who that person or persons may be in order to continue at that level that we need to perform at.
And kind of to that point, Greg and Kyle, I think, had kind of talked about it a little bit. Well, everybody had shared kind of the same sentiment. I know what I want. I know what we need. I'm following council's objectives. We're following, in this. We have identified a gap, both from being on the EDC board to what we're trying to do and how we're going to try to fill that role. So that's why I say the very quick timeline on it is because we know which direction that we're going and how that fits into at least the city's economic development sphere, and then how we would incorporate that as the EDC is transitioning into theirs. So I just wanted to throw that point out there.
And I want to just take the opportunity, Todd, to thank you in this forum, because Todd has stepped up and into this role. And I would take issue with something that both of you guys said, that KEDC is dead. KEDC is not dead. We've got active projects. Todd and I went out a few weeks ago and met with a very significant primary employer that's looking at doing a major expansion. And I just want y'all to know that, you know, because of Todd, I think we were very, I think we represented, Todd represented very well in that meeting. And so there are things that are very important to this community that are ongoing that may come up next week or next month. And we are open for business, and we're not out doing the big time recruiting that Gil was doing, but that doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. And I think it's really important, and thank you again so much for donating your time, and I think you're a great person to be there, so appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and I think everyone too that it's that important to me, and over all these years, and I know you've been involved too in so many years in doing this, that this is very important, that it is an ongoing pursued investment by the city and the stakeholders. Economic development, when we saw that umbrella the other day in our retreat, a big light went off in my head, and I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, it was to see that and the importance of what it means to our community and moving forward. So
I want to repeat that too, Todd. Thank you so much. You're one of the people that I think that we can look to, I can look to, and knowing that you're sitting in that desk right now looking, I mean, just gives, I think, the organization instant credibility. It makes me very, very comfortable with the things we're talking about. Yes, I have a lot of questions, right? But I do want to find the solution as well. But for the sake of, you know, the public and doing what we need to do, I think those questions do have to be asked. But I'm very appreciative of you as well.
thank you for the confidence. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate your conversation about it, so I can know more. And I think I have heard that this was your baby from a long time ago, and I really appreciate you stepping up for that. So, and it's got to also be hard, sad to see kind of what happened. So thank you for that too. So how much does the county give, and what is the stakeholders?
68,750 is what
Every
the city,
other-
county, and K-Pub all.
So three at that level.
Oh, 68. So, I guess my concern was about that particular, kind of the tenor of our current county commissioners. I am concerned about their willingness to stay with, giving some money to KEDC. So I would just encourage that conversation to be happening so that we have some assurances from the county commissioners.
And yes, ma'am, and again, that is part of during this transition period too, and in all fairness, we owe that to all of the stakeholders as well too, and some of the concerns about the continued funding. And as Judge Kelly is one of our board members as well, and I've had some conversations with Commissioner Holt as well too through this process. So the intent is also to stay engaged with the stakeholders and keep them updated as we process this transition and move forward. And we've got some of that coming up next week, I believe. Some reach out to the other stakeholders. And
Yeah, I think that's great. I just would hate for this to be a reason for them to step away from that.
Agree, and I don't know. I mean, I personally haven't heard, even from a board member standpoint. But I hear some positive feedback from it. But I feel better, as Greg said, what the boards actually think, and that may be us getting in front of them.
Will you share with us not the people necessarily, but the designated positions on the board as far as this, there's a stakeholder position, right?
Yes, absolutely. So on our board currently, City Manager Dalton Rice, the Mayor, then we have Mike Whitler with K-Pub on the board with us. We have Judge Kelly. We have Dr. Ringo, Dr. Mindy Curran on the board with us as well. We have Mindy Wendeley with the Chamber of Commerce. We have Julie Davis with the CVB. We have Jonathan, former Commissioner Jonathan Letts, on the board
Because you have
with us too.
business, you have
It's a
designated
business.
so every stakeholder, and then what, about 3 positions that are designated business?
Two.
Or
Business two, right now, I'm one of
Two
those
members.
business positions, and then, Jonathan Letts
Okay.
is the other.
Just to give you an idea of who sits on the board, yeah.
Yeah, there's representation from all of the stakeholders that have really solid input and get to go back and then feel the,
Right.
the temperature of their board and update them as we move forward.
So they've been a part of it all along, too.
Yes,
so
ma'am,
it's
yes,
good.
ma'am, yes, yes.
Good. Did you have some things?
Yes, my original thought was, I too support and can understand the reasons why we might need this kind of a position. And my original question was revolving around the measurement of success, like Kyle said. If we're gonna do something like this, we need to figure out how we're gonna know it's working. And the obvious part is that it's just gonna take some time. And so we would need some kind of, way to measure and a time frame for that measurement. It's gonna take this person a while before they can make up for any costs that that we're having to pay for. The other thing too is you mentioned that there's some other EICs around the state that do things a little differently. Maybe this is the time to consider doing something differently here too.
We are doing what's different compared to other EDCs.
Yeah, well, maybe we start doing what other EDCs are doing and bring that stuff in-house instead of having a separate organization that, is hard for us to monitor or manage and we just fund.
Yeah, well, a great example, sorry to cut you off. I'd spoken with Gil, before he left, kind of about the, his transition, was talking about some of the ideas and the economic development manager bringing it, a portion of it into the city. He left to go to a place that it's part of the city. Again, that's $40+ million budget. It's, a different situation, but that was one of the many reasons why he had left. Again, wasn't always just one thing, but he went to a place that had it integrated within the city. So there's, again, a lot of different EDCs do things differently. I would say ours is probably more of one of the unique ones in just how we fund it, because y'all are more of a holding company, if you will, a funding vehicle, and then it gets divvied out from there. But again, it's a technique, and how we, accomplish that technique it's just a little bit different and adds a little bit more red tape, but there's nothing wrong with that. What we're doing is not wrong, it's just a different way of doing it.
Well, I definitely think that the momentum for KEDC has gone kaput, obviously with the departures, and so it's gonna be tough to get that back, no matter what you do, even if you hire somebody next week, it's gonna take a long time to rebuild that momentum. And maybe it's time for us to think about doing something different there. And then my last question is, we're talking about some of the other stakeholders like KPUB and the county keeping their funding, hopefully keeping it there. But what about asking them for an increase in their funding if?
Good luck with that one.
I mean, the county's probably a for sure no, because they're struggling right now too, but.
KPUB struggled with that one last year or 2 years ago as well. That's kind of been the big elephant in the room was, funding kept kind of increasing. And to your, I think multiple, statements about measured success, right? That's been a big question is, what's this funding and what's the measured success? And we can say, well, we got Mega Creek, we got these, and those are great. But how do you define metrics from a true data-driven standpoint? And I think that's where both the opportunities for EDC, again, the economic development sphere, both city and EDC, I think there's some improvement in that area.
Well, I think I would be in favor of us thinking about how can we just reimagine the whole thing? Because if we're going to start from scratch, basically, let's start from scratch. That'd probably be something that I would think about or want to talk about a little bit more before we decided to fund this other position. And I think if we were going to fund that position, that the most we should consider doing is maybe half of it. If we still want to continue with KEDC, I can still see the need for that position, and maybe we should consider looking at funding half of it and then start there and then work our way up if we need to, if it turns out it's working and we've come up with some measurements for success and it happens to pay off in a year or two.
I don't know, and y'all tell me if you think differently. I don't know, this is a consideration and possible action. I don't know that there's an action.
I would recommend to table it for future discussion.
I would say that I think going back to what Greg said, that kind of ties into what Gil says, is what we probably really need to see before we commit is exactly what direction is KEDC looking to take, what direction, I hear where you're coming from on the city.
Yeah.
Maybe just a little more concrete, like where are those dollars going and what are we, that specific direction and how the numbers are tied to that
And I would add
direction.
to that, there's a financial forecast, what it would look like for us in our tight budget years in the next few years.
Yep. We're probably gonna see that in just a minute.
Yeah, y'all get the financial update, and I think y'all are going to be pleased with it. So,
I mean, we're all sitting here on this board
Yeah.
because we care about economic development, we care about our city, so we want going forward nothing but success with.
I don't think you're getting anybody over here shaking their head saying that we don't think this position is a valuable addition. I think you're getting concerns about finance and you're getting concerns about uncertainty in the market with regard to EDC, obviously, and the stakeholders. I think we're kind of saying all the
Yep.
same things here. Timing is always important, and maybe, as you just said, tabling this for a minute, let you guys have a meeting or two, figuring out what you're gonna do, and then come back to us with another presentation that shows us a little bit more concrete what's going forward.
yeah, I think what would also help too from the board is, and again, y'all have been dealing with the EDC a lot longer, and there's a lot of things that I'm hearing, kind of questions that we had kind of talked about. Todd kind of alluded to some of those. I think we got to ask the same question to EDC, and I think that's important because what is the defined measure of success? How do we do this? I think getting some clear direction from the EIC board as a whole of what do y'all want to see in setting those clear expectations as far as how do you want these groups to function and the role of those groups, especially as involved as we want to be. I think that'll help us out a lot in doing that. Because again, I have direction. I have, the 2050 plan. I have all of this. I already have what we need to do to kind of tackle it. And my measure of success is the, 450, action items within the 2050 plan. I think how we show those measures of success, I think that's y'all's cup of tea, whether that's graphs, charts, balloons, whatever. But I think from the EDC side, and we'll call it the economic development sphere, I would definitely encourage the EIC, we can bring in some facilitators, we can do some training outside to help better understand, the economic development environment, and how these different positions could play a role in benefiting, economic development within Kerrville and Kerr County. So I would definitely encourage the board on that.
You're also coming to us at a moment in time where we're all being very conscious of every dollar that goes out the door. So if we had $10 million sitting in a slush fund waiting to be used for something, it would be a
Well,
very
I wish we would have done the
different
finance update
conversation.
before, because I think it would have shed a little bit of light on that, but.
Well, we can
we'll,
still,
yeah.
come back to it.
Okay, so,
Appreciate it, thank y'all.
Motion to table or?
yeah, do we need a motion to table or just not take action?
Sorry, go ahead.
Whatever y'all are comfortable with.
I really don't know what that motion would be, so I think we've probably okay just going on, and we've kind of directed maybe, hopefully you guys, as to next steps for us to be able to look at the funding. And Michael, I know that you're trying to juggle this kind of economic development and project management and all of those things, and so I know that there is a position that needs to be created at the city. I just think we all want to make sure that we're comfortable and what that looks like and what EDC is trying to accomplish as well.
I fully understand all that. It is what it is. This is not the first time, and it's not going to hurt my feelings. And so, we'll keep working on it, right? It's a work in progress.
And aren't you glad we moved y'all up on the agenda? Sorry, I apologize. This is, you are next on the agenda. So this is going to be the item 5B on the agenda, the report from James Avery.
So just to kind of briefly go over it, what you had in your packets, you had the original agreement from 2015 and the the subsequent amendment that came in 2021, which is kind of a byproduct of COVID. And first, let me introduce we have Paul Zip, who is CEO and president.
COO, no.
COO,
Yeah,
sorry.
don't give me that
COO.
promotion.
I understand.
Grateful
And-
for what I have.
And Tom Pogue, who is the VP of Manufacturing over at James Avery here to kind of help us talk through it. So when COVID hit, everything kind of went into turmoil. For those of you that were either on council or on EIC, you remember that it was really hard to figure out how to meet those benchmarks because the world was in chaos and who knew what was doing anything. I had a credit union in Live Oak that had 1,900 employees that worked at the office at Randolph Brooks Federal Credit Union. They all went and worked remote. Nobody was in the office. And it was, so I mean, then that was for everybody. And so, so in 21, the agreement was extended and kind of, forgiven for those, for a little while and kind of ramped up the number of employees that were slated to be on the books as full-time employees, in addition to the 388 that were in their employ here as of 2015. And so last year there was a little bit of a dip from that number, and I think, and Paul I'm sure is going to speak to this, that James Avery suffers from the same thing that all of us suffer from. It is a really hard job market out there. How are we finding our employees? How are we rotating them? When I talk to my police chief, we always tell our police and fire chiefs never to say that we're full. Because immediately when they say that, someone turns in a resignation because they found a job elsewhere. And so we're always reluctant to talk about that. And so last year that number hit 330. And so this year, as a part of their submission, there's an annual submission. And that number was 212. So it was a fairly substantial drop from last year's figure. But Dalton and I think Tom and Paul were talking, some of the metrics that aren't as concrete as these employment numbers as far as how many people are employed is what's the salary of those employees? What are the benefits of those employees? And how does that factor in? Because I think anybody who's a business owner or having to buy things nowadays, it's all costing more, right? The cost of our employees, the cost of our health insurance, the cost of our materials. So those are all kind of factors that drive part of our conversations. And I'll turn it over because.
Yeah, and can I make a comment too? Also, just to some of the things that Michael is saying, I imagine are sensitive to James Avery as far as specific details. So we may have questions that I would encourage everybody to ask whatever questions that you have, but they may be things that need to have follow-up conversations if they, or they can be answered in general terms if those kinds of questions come up. So please, if we're asking something that is not something that is able to be shared, just let us know, and we can figure out a way to have that conversation
I'll take the
differently.
fifth.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. We do want to provide as much candor as we can, but there certainly is a private company and with a presence as we do both locally and across the state. We want to be mindful of those things and speak clearly and transparently, but at the same time recognizing there's certain elements that are proprietary to a certain degree, right? We've got some large multinationals that would love to have a little peek inside of what James Avery, what makes us tick. First of all, I want to thank the board and Kim for the opportunity to come and speak to this. We recognize, as Michael alluded to, the best laid plans of mice and men were actually rocking along really, really well. When we look back over the course of this, and I apologize if I play historian for just a hot minute, but what Michael laid out initially was penned and kind of put together in 2014. So it's been 10 years since we sat down and started having a discussion. I was here with a couple of other cohorts from James Avery at the time, and we reached an agreement and struck that in early 2015. And what came out of that was something that was working really well from an overall perspective until COVID, as Michael alluded to. And so what happened with that for us was that there was a significant disruption, right? As a manufacturer and a non-essential business relative to the COVID regulations that were in place at the time, we had to shut down our operations, all operations, all of our retail stores across the state, as well as all of our manufacturing operations within the state of Texas. We were fortunate that we had inventory that we were able to work off of over a period of time. But even after the governor gave the order to rescind the operational shutdown requirement, we were only able to come back at a certain percentage, right, based on square footage. So facilities that were intended to hold 200 people could hold 75, 50. And so city worked with us as we came to them, and different members, different city managers, et cetera. There's been a, kind of a dotted line to get us here. The long and the short of it is that we were clipping along meeting all of our targets until that happened. And really the way that James Avery works and the way that we function and how we plan and how we think about it, steady growth is very manageable. And it is one that has played well over the company's long tenure. And what I mean by that is we have a cadence that we go through as opening retail stores, and cadence is largely driven by what we have the capacity to produce. Most of all of our product, and at the time that COVID hit, all of our product was that was manufactured here in Texas, which is well over 90% of what we make, was within the Hill Country, between Hondo and Fredericksburg. And the challenge that we ran into was that all of that got shut down, and we had to re-envision what we were, how we're going to come back. We had a lot of associates that weren't able to come back or chose not to come back because of health concerns and things of that nature. So that was part of the rationale as to why we took a re-look at and amended, because the original agreement was supposed to stop in 2021, and all of us probably were trying to forget what we were doing in 2021 relative to vaccines and COVID restrictions and everything else that were guiding our lives, and we were having to keep track of the changing rules and the environment there. Unfortunately, as Michael alluded to, there was also a surge in job requirements. The idea of finding anyone across the United States, especially in a hotbed such as Texas, and then in a smaller community such as Kerrville, was very difficult. So while we lost, significant number of our long-term associates because they looked at it and their desire to try and stay was offset by health concerns. Either they were caring for a loved one or they themselves were concerned about any potential concerns they had. So we lost, and so what we had to send home when we shut down didn't all come back. And then trying to refill those positions. While we have entry-level labor that we will bring on and train up and create, if you will, train craftspeople in order to be able to perform the functions to generate or produce the jewelry that we all enjoy, that's not something that you just step in and are able to do day one. That's something that takes a period of time. And for some, it's in a skill that they just don't possess, whether it be at a level of detail or particular details along those lines. So it was an especially challenging time to try and recruit en masse, because remember, we do well at a steady incline. When you have a shutdown followed by, in 2021, a stimulus-induced surge of over 40% in revenue, going from that kind of a start-stop to full throttle and rocket ship kind of numbers, it was overly taxing. And so what basically has happened is what we maintain is a steady level of business and grow from an inventory standpoint to service all of our stores, which we're very blessed and very grateful. Our store count has grown since the start of this agreement. We're up to 132 stores across mostly Texas. And that's a testament to how the brand resonates across the state. But the challenge of that is trying to service that demand. And when all of that was here in Kerrville, and we couldn't find the associates to be able to hire on and bring in, we had to look elsewhere. So while there was an initial commitment from a capital perspective, because the agreement was not only jobs, it was also capital, it was also maintaining a wage rate. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And the other component that was in there was relative to our distribution center and our fulfillment for all of our e-commerce and direct channel. Positive note that came out of COVID. A lot of people that love James Avery that had never been on our website found our website. And so the city benefited from that to the tune of $1 million in sales tax revenue in 2021. So that pulled a lot of people there, and many of them have remained. They continue to be a frequent customer in that regard. So there's a silver lining from that perspective. But what we ran up against in order to be able to keep on top of our demand and supply, to keep those two in sync, demand was racing ahead while our doors were shuttered. And while we were slowly creeping out of this, demand kept running out forward. And the way that I described it in those years was that we started with a fully stocked pantry, refrigerator, and freezer. And in the course of the first couple of years of COVID, we emptied the freezer. We went hard into the pantry, and we were jeopardizing the refrigerator from the standpoint of being able to satisfy all the demand that was coming through. It's taken us the better part of almost the last 3.5 years is when we finally started to catch up, where our supply finally caught up with demand. In the course of that, while we were obligated and we fulfilled the obligation, actually exceeded the obligation from a CapEx investment to put additional property base back into the county and city, we exceeded that original requirement by well over right around $10 million or so. When it was all said and done, that building was about half full. We couldn't recruit talent in Kerrville, Comfort, and the surrounding areas in order to try and fill those seats. Meanwhile, demand continues to outpace. So we were forced with a hard decision to look elsewhere within the state, and that's how Corpus Christi came to be. And another $20 million investment in order to try and stand that up and find additional associates with affordable and available housing, with a varied and a bigger workforce available. And we found a structure that we were able to retrofit for our operation. And it took a better part of about 18 months for that to stand up, and it is now up and running. It's well below any size compared to Kerrville, but it's meaningful. If you had asked me when some of the, I know Kyle and Greg came to visit us, we were talking about another arrangement. A year ago, we were expecting that we were going to be right on target. And what drove a lot of that, frankly, was a turnover rate that in a small community such as Kerrville was 2 to 3 times what we'd ever seen historically. If you can imagine hiring someone and they stick around for a month, 6 weeks, and then trying to restart that wheel again and again and again while trying to maintain our quality standards and our productivity standards, et cetera. And so the challenge that we ran into was this revolving door until we came to the realization that we had to go elsewhere. And don't take this the wrong way. Kerrville was not alone in that. We saw that across the spectrum. The only place that was really a haven was our retail, because it was an opportunity to do something that people enjoyed and they wanted to go have a part in that. But on the manufacturing side, things were especially difficult. So we were able to sustain at a certain level to a certain point, and then what happened was our assumptions for what we're going to have to maintain, both from a productivity, from a turnover perspective, began to switch on us in 2024. Frankly, for the betterment of the long-term benefit of the company, because we didn't have to have as many hours going in because we weren't having to train as many people, and slowly over the course of the, really in the last few months of 24, turnover started to drift lower. It's not back to where it was pre-COVID. We're still well above our norms. But for us, doing the right thing for the business didn't necessarily mean that we were able to fill those positions in Kerrville as we thought we would need to, and as we had every intention of doing. And so what ultimately happened is what I would submit to the board as we look at that original agreement. There are multiple aspects of that original agreement that we have far exceeded with regard to the wage requirements, the CapEx requirements, and maintaining our facilities from a distribution perspective that puts all that sales tax revenue back into the community. Our sales tax revenue, since we inked that deal, is well up over 50% on a year over year. And it was always kind of interesting during the COVID period because sales tax revenue was making the front page of the KDT, and we knew what we were paying into it. And it was pretty meaningful because we were seeing some large shifts in demand to our e-commerce channel. What we saw with regard to our wages in order to try and recruit talent, in order to try and retain talent, just since COVID, not anything that happened afterwards. We're well up over 70% of the target that was in the original agreement. And when you boil that down, what stayed in Kerrville because of the similar group of people, while smaller in number, what they're being paid in aggregate is equivalent to about over 300 positions that were contemplated at the original rate. So what you have is an economic engine and a smaller group of people being paid more money because now they're being paid on average well over 70% of what they were 10 years ago. And so when we look at that, the other piece of it I would just put out there, James Avery is headquartered here. We've been here 70 years. We just celebrated our 70th anniversary. We don't intend to go anywhere. We continue to make CapEx investment. I was talking to Dalton about it last week. Over $13 million in addition to what we put in out there by the airport. since then, and a good chunk of that this past year, a little over $2 million that we put in with regard to expanded distribution center, additional automation and sortation that is out there in order for us to continue to grow. That will drive additional replenishment to our retail stores and service our growing e-commerce business, et cetera. So there's a long-term investment that we continue to make, not only into the community, but also into our associates and workforce. Part of what we saw, in addition to the turnovers, we start to see that those people that stuck through that recruitment period post-COVID have finally, in their own skills development and proliferation, they are now contributing at a higher level. So what we're seeing is their productivity has grown. Their benefit, their growth as individuals has benefited the company. And as turnover began to drift back, as productivity started to rise, our labor requirements begin to reduce, not because the volume went down, but because the productivity went up. So would I have forecasted that a 100-year pandemic would have interrupted our agreement 10 years ago? The answer is absolutely not. And if I had, I would have made some different investments, not necessarily related to James Avery. I might have chosen to time a few other options when they fell. But candidly, part of what I wanted to come and share with the board, and is just one, to recognize our plans of what we thought, again, 12 months ago, would not have told us that we would be here with a number that is less than what we intended, but we believe that there is more than enough economic benefit that has come in the course of time, whether it be through wages, CapEx, and additional tax revenue, which is up in general. All that CapEx, all the in our inventories, that's the other component, to service an 80% increase in your store count, and a growing e-commerce business has only generated additional tax base that we continue to contribute. We're going to be good corporate citizens. We're going to continue to do what's required. But in this particular regard, I couldn't thread the needle to be able to deliver the jobs at the same time that we were doing all the other things that we were doing for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of the company, and to ensure that, Lord willing, 70 years from now, somebody else is standing here talking to a different group of folks about the 100-plus year legacy and what we've been able to accomplish. So from that vantage point, I'm happy to try and field questions. One thing that I would just put out there as it relates to the prior discussion, and I don't want to wander into EDC world to save my life, but I would say that one of the areas that they were trying to help us out in, and we had some discussion in our two hot topics that we've spoken about with the chamber. I know I sat in on a panel with Peterson talking about housing, or lack thereof, availability and affordability. If you want to have a robust EDC, if you want to have a robust business community, you've got to have houses for people to live in. You're not going to have a workforce if you don't have places for people to live. And that runs up and down the spectrum. The concerns last week, and I know y'all aren't the city council, I'm not addressing that to you guys, I'm just raising the concern when we start looking at, regardless of where it came from, when D.R. Horton, who's a fairly large builder in the scope of the United States, rolls in and wants to put 1,100 homes somewhere inside Kerr County and potentially inside the city limits, guys, that would help. Childcare would help. A lot of the caregivers that were available prior to COVID sadly either passed or they weren't able to continue in their service because many of those folks were parents and grandparents of folks that were part of the workforce. And this isn't just a Kerrville issue, okay? Childcare is a statewide, national issue. It's an affordability and availability. And so that has limited our ability to access certain aspects of the workforce. We've augmented our process. So it's not full-time positions, but we're in the process of testing part-time positions. We've had really good response so far this year. We launched that in January. And what we're looking at is folks that fit just inside our typical slots for a day and an evening shift, testing it here in Kerrville. And we've had really good response, frankly, better than what we've seen in a long time on our full-time positions. And while these don't provide all the full benefits, they still get the same pay relative to the hourly wage that's being offered for those roles. And there are folks who want to come in and do that work in that time frame because it fits their lifestyle. And it's not something necessarily that's something that we've done a lot of in the past. So we've had to pivot and adjust in that regard. And so my point there is we're not trying to do the same thing over and over again to get a different result. The challenge is we're having to adapt and change in an environment that frankly is more dynamic, where we need to be more nimble than trying to hold, to carry the responsibility that we know that we have relative to the EIC agreement that we struck 10 years ago. But there was some shucking and jiving that had to happen in those last 4 years that we had higher responsibilities we needed to respond to. We are committed to try and continue to grow. There is opportunity we see right now for another 40 or so positions that we plan to probably add back in the course of 2025 as we see demand continue to increase just in manufacturing. And then there's another handful or two corporate level positions that we think there's opportunity for the additional growth here. Some of it is a timing issue, given Christmas holidays and being what it is. We don't do a whole lot of recruiting in that November, December timeframe because it's a little bit chaotic around the retail storefront. And so some of those positions posted, you know, and they're being filled as we speak. We've had some pretty good traction, and the job market is starting to lighten up a little bit. But again, the challenge that I see that we're going to have in the Kerrville and the Kerr County area relative to development here, development in Center Point. You know, the challenges that are out there and some of the flags that were raised in the recent council meeting relative to water resources is a concern. You know, as a business owner, if I'm a business looking at trying to come into the Kerrville community, and we've got our city council saying that we have a water issue and we're not going to be opening our doors to additional development from a housing perspective, that closes the door on business. That closes the doors on the next big builder that may be thinking about doing that project. My encouragement would, as a community, that we take a serious look at that because there are buildable sites. There are areas where development is necessary. And if we truly desire to have a vibrant business community, which we believe is possible, there's a commitment that's needed in order for us to rethink how we consider housing, how we think about childcare, because the other folks that have come into the community, into the business community, are going to have the same struggles. And if they're not successful in a short period of time, they don't have 70 years to stand on in the community in order to be able to support waiting out that change to occur. And that, I think, is, you know, it's not necessarily the EIC's charge specifically as it relates to negotiating some of those agreements, but it's critical if there is a desire to have this robust environment, you've got to be able to plow the field and be able to plant the seeds. And if you're not willing to put your hand to the plow, then don't expect that much of a crop. That's really what we ran into, because when we start looking at the cost of what it cost us to operate, the average housing cost, and I said this in a communication in that panel discussion of the city or to the chamber, Kerrville's 3x what it costs us in any of other hill country locations from a housing perspective, and over that compared to our Corpus location. If we don't provide housing that's affordable for folks to live here, and I'm not just talking about workforce housing, but you've got to open up those various layers in order for that to happen. And at the end of the day, that's what really, combined with the COVID, you know, layer on the lack of inventory in that regard from a housing perspective and the overall job environment. From our perspective, that has really been some of the major headwinds that we've been up against relative to our performance. The good news is the company has been able to pivot. And so our long-term perspective is very positive. I'm very bullish on James Avery. I'm very bullish on Kerrville. But I would like for us to be able to see some additional growth and development in those areas where I think from a general community and from a business community, we're probably underserved trying to build that.
Can I ask you,
Sure.
based on what you said about housing type and availability, is the housing stock that Lennar is providing something that's accessible to the workforce that you're looking for? Is that an affordability level for?
Not directly, but what it provides, when you have the inventory at that level,
up the other?
then everybody pulls up. You draw, and that opens up inventory at more attainable price points. We have been actively involved with some of the habitat work and funding purchases and such of land. That's some of our charitable operations there. But relative to Lennar, relative to some of the other developments that have been proposed, and I would say that's one of the hard parts, is you'll see something proposed and then it doesn't gain any traction, or we see the prospect of it start to rise up. So I don't know that targeting specific workforce build is absolutely necessary. I think it should be part of a larger strategy relative to trying to address those different price points. Because part of what we encounter, and I know that the hospital has had similar challenges, is when you have a dual income family and you only have one that can find a position, well, now you're asking the other spouse, either they're not going to come to Kerrville, they're going to live in Bernie, and they're going to commute opposite directions, or you're going to have one that's based here and then somebody's making a long commute into San Antonio or to Bernie. And so to the degree that you're able to provide a broader inventory at various price points, then you open up the opportunity for, even if you open up that or reduce the affordability gap for them to be able to potentially find something local. But to be able to provide that dual income, you need to have that additional or that expanded business base in order to be able to support those that are looking for a technical, like that's what we run into. We have a lot of talent that is sitting right on the edge of Kendall that drives in because they've got spouses that are driving in the opposite direction. And that's just part of where we're at. That's how we ended up expanding into Austin for IT talent and things of that nature. That was a couple decades ago, so a similar prospect.
Paul,
That
I
answer your
think
question?
that scenario is pretty familiar.
Yes, sir.
The city, community here has had that same matrix of 1/3 of the community commutes out to work, 1/3 of the people that work here commute in, and another third just stays here and works,
Right.
So that's nothing new to Kerrville, and I don't know how quickly that's gonna change.
I don't see it that way,
Unfortunately, I don't
yeah.
think,
I would
the
agree.
dirt here costs what the dirt here costs.
Mm-hmm.
And unless we get to a point where we've got more supply than we do demand, that's how that works. It just doesn't change. I do know that we're very focused on that as a board here, and we're working desperately hard to get that handled or fixed. It's gonna take a minute. Of course. We don't build houses overnight, but
Oh, yeah, yeah.
we're working hard on that, and we recognize, and after our meeting with y'all last year, it was very crystal clear that the struggles that you guys are facing is a community-wide struggle.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're working on it, and we appreciate the Avery Company being here more than you know. So hope you know that.
No, and we appreciate the support. I mean, it's, whether it was this particular agreement or what have you, I mean, the overall community support, and I would say it's reciprocal. It's one of those things Mr. Avery always was looking for, how do we give back? It's not just about the bottom line. So those are other aspects, but part of it just is the opportunity. The housing component is just one of those things. There's not a short-term fix for it. And the challenge is there's also competing forces that are also looking at it, wanting to close the back door as they make their way into the community, and I get that. So the challenge that I would see, not only for this organization, but frankly for an organization such as ours, in working with the EDC, is trying to find that balance of, if you want all these goodies relative to services, relative to restaurants, businesses, retail outlets, et cetera, you're going to have to expand the pie a little bit in order to be able to lay down some houses or just accept what you have. I mean, there's a chicken and egg element, but if you want a different result, you got to do something different. And I think the Lennar was a good step in the right direction. But I would say that there have been others that didn't make it that far, that got squashed in the process. And I can think back in just my short time here in the community, if we had acted on more of those, it would have been seeds that have been planted that would already be producing, and we would not be in quite the same position. It's not an easy solve. I'm not trying to deny that. The challenge that we have from a topography standpoint is killer, right? There's not a good level spot until you get over to East Curve.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any questions?
It's very thorough, thank
All
you.
right, this is eligible for executive session. I will entertain a motion to go into an executive session if anyone has the desire to do so.
Is there something we need to act on today?
We need to determine whether, or go ahead, Michael. Were you gonna speak to that? And we can certainly, we don't have to necessarily take an action tonight.
You don't have to take any action, but if you do decide that you want to take some action, you have a window in there if you want to.
What is I'm not.
So
clear
what
on
we
the
need to
action
do is determine what we as EIC will do in regards to the part of the agreement that was not met. There are some, we all got the agreement, right? So we know that there's some kind of clawbacks to that agreement. So basically, we could say that as a body that we want to trigger those clawbacks. We can say that we don't want to take any action. We can say that we would like to extend the agreement. I mean, we have some. We need to have some sort of action so that James Avery knows, where we are within the scope of this agreement that's basically over at this point as far as the agreement goes. So,
So the agreement has expired?
February 1st, yes, sir.
mhm.
I'd like to move into executive session
I'll
then,
second that.
and go ahead and
Yeah.
make a decision.
So we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor? of
Well,
going ahead?
hang on, if you'll just, you need to cite the section, so it's 5.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm not as formal these days. Let's see. We are gonna, motion from Celeste to go into executive session under, where is it?
Look under 6.
Oh, yeah, 551.087 and
071, just use
071. Okay, somebody else should have done that. All right, so we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor? Raise your hand. Okay. Can we use the one down here so okay. Is that okay?
We can just stay here.
That's what it's there for.
Well, yeah, we could, but there's one right over here. We could just pop in.
Okay.
Certainly can.
I don't anticipate it taking a long time. Okay. Is it open? Is it?
Yes, it's open.
Throw anybody out there.
I need a restroom back out.
Okay, yes, if you need to go to the restroom. All right. We're green, so we're ready? Okay.
Yep.
It is 6 o'clock, believe it or not, and we are back from executive session, and we're now in regular session. And we do, I believe we will make a motion at this time.
I make a motion that we agree that James Avery has met the terms of their contract and the contract is satisfied and terminated.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, please let me know by raising your hand. Thank you.
Thank you guys for all the information today. Appreciate it.
And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to.
Absolutely, we appreciate
A
that.
lot of really good things are happening here in the city.
Financial report, you gotta finish on this.
Have been part of making that happen.
Thank you, we're grateful for you.
Thank you. We're happy to continue to grow here and.
Thanks for your patience tonight, too. That was a long day.
Yeah, we did move you up. I don't know how much it helped, but we did.
Y'all are lucky you get to leave. We don't get to leave.
Thank you. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you for your service. Appreciate it.
All right, so now that we have fulfilled item 5A, 5B, and 6A, we're going to move back into item 4A. We're going backwards.
We're going backwards, but we're going to get there.
All right.
Oh, sweet. Okay. So just a quick update on basically all the projects that are currently under some form of construction or about to be under some form of construction. So if everybody remembers from the Quality of Life Bond, we have those 7 projects, I guess. Cali Theater, the pool, the golf course, AC Shriner House, Granger McDonald, and the 2 park, KSP and Guadalupe Park play structures. All right, Cali Theater is about to kick off, so if I wasn't busy enough already, I'm about to be busier. So March 4th, I think, is our start date. Playhouse 2000 asked for March 3rd to be their last day because they have one more event. And so we were going to start the very next day, and then expected completion is they're really going to be complete by about August 1st, but usually there's about a 30-day punch list, especially with this project because there's going to be a lot to look at. Should be complete by August 31st. I think we're probably going to be done before then. The estimate from Peter Lewis was about a 3-month window, and this is, quite a bit longer than that. We gave ourselves enough time, though, to make sure if there was any hiccups. Who knows? When you peel back the layers of an existing building, you never know what you're going to get. So we have requested we've gotten the scope from Jeffrey over at Playhouse 2000, but they're still working up the numbers on additional work to be done out there. They put together kind of a list of quite a few items. I brought that up with City Council. If you remember, we budgeted $4 million for this project. $2.99 million is the budget for the construction company. So at the very least, I would say you have $750,000 to expect to be remained out of this project. I think it's going to go a little bit over 3, but I think you're going to have savings on this project.
Is there an expectation, is council saying that their preference would be to reallocate to some of the money to the additional things that were damaged or whatever it may be in the?
So Jeff Harris, he brought it up in addition to Councilwoman Sigerman about some of those interior pieces that are capital in need, that may be kind of a wear and tear, but here's an opportunity to kind of, breathe some more life into that for another 20 years for some stuff. And so, we had a what was damaged by the water and the roof, and those are in the scope, and what was, like the lighting on the walking up the stairs when you're in the dark theater. If you've been in there, it's not very good. Some new sconce lighting, things like that. Zhuzhing up a couple of the things. Maybe taking the golden bathroom and making it not golden, more brass. Which there's kind of a list, but we don't have a quote.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to prolong this meeting by any means, but that if there's cost savings, then there's gonna have to be an agreement between both the EIC board and council as to where those funds are gonna be allocated. So, we need to, you know,
We need to have some.
take our temperature check and make sure that we all kind of can agree to whatever the. going forward
100%.
will be.
Yeah, I fully expect that those conversations are going to be kind of exhaustive and between both the
But not
boards.
tonight.
So, you know, we have 5 agreements,
Right.
right? And so there's a limit to each one of those. And I
Or
think
you could workshop them all.
we could do it. We could absolutely do that.
Video.
So I think about midsummer, when we're halfway through this project and we're most halfway through the golf project, and pool is the one that's going to take the longest, and Granger McDonald is probably going to take the longest because of the state. I think, but those Granger McDonald, and I think I'll get to the other ones. But yes, we can absolutely do that. Not prepared to do that yet, but
Don't want to.
we're close. We had a meeting today on the 50% construction drawings at the Olympic pool. And so tentatively that one's scheduled to go out to bid in mid-March, and we would come back to council in May for the contract award. And then the estimate is a 50-week construction schedule. So that would be open kind of late spring, early summer. It might delay the starting of the season potentially. So we're working hard to get that thing out as quickly as we can, and we'll put some deadlines in that kind of accelerate that as much as we can. But again, you're peeling back the layers of something that hasn't been peeled back for a long time, and you don't know what you're gonna get into. Scott Shriner Golf Course. So last time there was a bunch of smaller projects that we did a lot of internal work. We had staff. We basically the bond paid for the materials, and then we did a lot of the labor internally when we had an opportunity to. That's like kind of those first 5 bullet points. The 2 biggest contracts are the green and course renovations and the bridge. So XGD is the golf course remodeler, and they've torn up all the greens, all the tee boxes. They have reshaped bunkers. They're working on right now they're working on redoing the putting green for the practice area, right? And so that's kind of next on that project. And then Fonseca, MC Fonseca, is doing all the bridge renovations. So that's about a $500,000 project. And they've demoed all the bridges. They've got the footings for most of them. And now they're going to kind of proceed. And everybody is blowing and going out there. They're starting to bring base material, not like sod. Hopefully it hasn't arrived yet and won't arrive for about 4 days.
Yeah.
But it's not the sprigs, it's not the grass. So we've had lots of conversations
You
about
got room in your garage, don't you?
we'll find some. If we need to put it somewhere, we're going to put it somewhere. In that project, we still have pending stuff. We're going to tear down the restroom that's on number 2. There was a Green Technologies bathroom that's going to be put in on 14. That one's kind of, we don't have to plumb it. It's a little bit more sustainable. And
What about the one that's right above number
4?
Number 4.
That stays.
It stays. Okay.
That one's going to stay. So number 2 was a good bathroom to have. Yeah.
Wrong place.
Yeah. Don't. When the golf course was configured in a different way.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
So now that it's configured the way it is. So the estimates we have with all the things that we plan to do out there is about 3.5. So we I've worked with Shane and kind of all ballparked all the things that we want to put in there and all the things that we had planned to do, and we're about 3.5. So we should have about $500,000 in there. And that still has, I think I put in a 5% contingency, and so hopefully we won't eat into that, and we'll have a little bit more in the savings.
Okay, I have to ask, what is a butter block?
Kerr County, so butter block is a big limestone block.
Oh.
Hill country. So what we have out there as you walk up to the
I don't know
tees,
what they were called.
we have old railroad ties,
Uh-huh.
real rotted, basically nothing at this point. And so those are being replaced with butter blocks. So they'll be, a little nicer.
Attractive.
Hill country
Features out
butter.
there. And I'm a golfer, and so I'm pretty heavy in this. I'm heavy in all projects, but I'm a little particular. They get annoyed with me because I'm like, what about
pet
this? What about this?
Where is the new restroom going on 14?
For the tee box, right past the tee, right past where like the ladies' tee would be. So between the tee box and the reuse pond,
Okay,
right in between
so
there.
not on 13 in that open space.
You finish 13,
Go right,
and then you're going up, and right as you're teeing off on 14, you can stop and use the restroom right there.
between the cart path and the,
The reuse pond.
okay.
That's right. So let's see. Okay, AC Shriner House. So this one is currently fully gutted. Demo's all done, just about. And if you've driven by it, you know they're putting the elevator in. You can see it. It will look nice. It will match. The house won't be pink at the end. I didn't know that. So apparently it wasn't always pink. Since I've been here, it was. There was a structural issue. After all the review and all the analysis, it was we need to put a beam basically in the center of the living room that goes from the crawl space to the third floor to hold the load of the third floor because the joists were cut for an aesthetic reason, and it didn't matter because it was just a family living in there. But now that you have a commercial space with people and exhibits and weight, so we've done it. We had 40 grand in the budget for it, and so we're on track. We're on budget. It's a lot.
No happy surprises yet?
No, I'm excited about the opportunities this project presents, is what I tell the staff all the time. And it's gonna be really cool when it's done, you know, and it's fun to see the transition.
Yeah.
And that will be substantially complete by the end of November, and then turn back over to the client, to HHHC in mid-December. They can start moving in. And Granger McDonald, so still in the design phase. I don't have too many updates on this one. The boating access grant was submitted to Parks and Wildlife. I will say that this one might take a hot minute because the Parks and Wildlife grant has to be approved by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and I don't know how quickly those phones are going to
Don't
get
we have a time limit?
85% though. Is this
Theoretically, they all have a time limit, but I can call the state. I can't call the feds
But
and
I
ask
mean, we
them
have
to
to
do
spend
anything.
85% of our funds in.
Oh, it's going to be that part's going to happen regardless, right? They're going to tell us yay or nay midway through this year on the planning grant, and if we get approved for that, you're almost guaranteed to get the construction grant approved if you've gotten up through the planning grant. So I think it was a really excellent grant process.
This?
2.2 to this one, 2 million to HHHC.
And you said there was gonna be some savings. Did y'all reconfigure the parking or something like that? Or is it because of the grant?
Well, because of the grant, if we get the grant, there's gonna be some savings.
Okay.
We did talk with UGRA, and we're gonna do asphalt in the drive line and permeable pavers in the parking spaces. She said it doesn't make any sense for you to do permeable pavers where you're driving. You're just gonna wreck it, and it's not gonna get you any extra saturation. So,
Permeable pavers.
yes.
What is that?
So HEB Foundation has them. If you go over to the HEB Foundation on Earl Garrett, is it on Earl Garrett? Yeah. Essentially, it's a system where, you know, instead of all the drainage running straight into the river, it hits those permeable pavers. It sinks in and is saturated by that. So it helps clean that water because it's all car oil, things like that. Lots of disturbance. And so it has an opportunity to sort of filter itself out before it goes back into either the aquifer or, in this case, probably the river. So again, two components, a planning component, and that's what they're going to do first. And hopefully we know by midsummer. And we'll keep pushing on the state. But again, that one's has to get federal review. And then KSP and Guadalupe Park. So they are currently installing the one at KSP right now. Each one of these projects takes about 5 weeks. So once they're done with this one, they'll move on to Guadalupe Park. They demo it, and they do a bunch of base work, and then they put the new park equipment up. Guadalupe Park's fundraised a bunch for a handicap swing, handicap accessible swing. So I think that's going to be included.
Who's fundraised?
There's Parks and Rec Advisory Board has a fund in the community foundation.
Oh, cool.
And so Austin put out a whole thing on, here's this opportunity,
Nice.
and I think they've raised like $15,000 for it so far.
That's good.
It's pretty awesome. Shriner, you guys heard from Lucian and their folks, so project seems to be moving forward and doing well. And then we talked about James Avery. The downtown streetscapes is complete, other than the lighting that's supposed to go over the street. So
The best part.
still waiting on Mike Whitler and getting that stuff approved. He has his hands full on a couple of
A
things,
couple other things.
but they did install several poles over there not too long ago, and so it's in the
It's
works.
gonna happen?
It is going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. Downtown River Trail, we got 3 more easements that we're working through. The apartment complex on G Street, which I think is actively for sale, which makes it a little bit of a challenge, trying to get an easement during somebody's title, like acquisition, right?
One right
So-
behind Wilson's?
Yeah. And owner on C Street, and then Callow Foundation. So we'll have the grant applied for with Transportation Alternatives. By the time midsummer hits, we'll need to have those acquired in order to proceed with the grant. So that's kind of where we're at there.
That's gonna happen, you think?
I think so. I'm confident. I feel good. Feel good about a lot of things.
Are you,
You know?
I'm sorry, are you still negotiating those, or is there someone?
No, so we've asked, so Larry Howard has been a dream, helping us kind of work through a lot of the easements. He's talked to tons of the landowners.
Okay.
He actually acquired some of the property from one of the areas, and he's working with us on, kind of areas that we have and areas that he has. So he's done a lot of that legwork.
Good.
And we're just finalizing kind of the last ones that are a little bit more of a challenge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Lennar is blowing and going. They've got 88 houses, 90 houses at this point in their first subdivision. So they have another 40 to go before that one's done.
And the demand is still there.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are blowing and going on the infrastructure. And so everybody's seen the hillside, I'm sure.
What's the median house price point on those?
So the net sales price on each of those houses after the incentives and closing costs and interest rate buy down, I think was 253. Now this one was a little confusing, and it might have been in the paper, I can't remember, but we talked
The
about
amount
it.
is not
Where,
straightforward.
like the sale price of the house is 300, and it can't sell for, it has to sell for less than 275. So how could you do that, right? You can do that because the bank over here is offering a 6.5% interest rate, and Lennar's offering 4.5%. So we do a net present value on that, and then they pay for the closing costs. So
Sneaky math, yeah, gotcha.
it's always never clear, right? It's always a little bit muddy, and the poor finance team has had to deal with this for months and just kind of working through this with them. So it'd be great if you could just say, hey, don't make it more than this, and then they're like, okay, here's this. But buying a house is about the longest process that most of us will go through, and has a lot of hair on it. So they're doing a good job, and they're fixing an issue. To what they were saying earlier, there's about 270 apartments that are under construction. It's going to be 620 homes with Lennar. There's going to be 332 in Comanche Trace. Now 70% of those people are going to be retirees that buy those homes. But there are a substantial amount of structures under construction, which for us, that number of places being built right now is pretty big, so.
Major step forward.
We're doing fine when it comes to like keeping up with the growth, and there's probably another 1,000 over 10 years that based on our housing study need to be done. And the housing study quantifies how many people travel over 50 miles. And we should take a 30% share of that. It's about 1,100 people. How many jobs are open? And there's about 700 jobs. So there's 1,800. And then how many homes sell on average over the last 5 years? And it's about 500. So you're looking at 2,300. So our housing study is going to say somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500, of which 1,200 are already being built. So we're doing good.
Much better than.
It's hard for council to say yes to 1,100 homes on 260 acres. That's a massive, massive. I get what he's saying. I get what James Avery is saying, but that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Habitat expects to be substantially complete by June of this year. We're working.
That's on the infrastructure, yeah, on the
The
infrastructure.
infrastructure,
Oh,
yeah, the piece that y'all are paying for, the infrastructure. We are working through kind of their reporting requirements, so everything we do here is a reimbursement grant. So they pay their contractor, they show us they paid their contractor, and we give them a reimbursement. I think they're asking for us to speed up. We said, you know, we would
For the
spend
schedule.
1.13 in one fiscal year and 1.13 in another fiscal year. So in theory, we're going to hit that number in like $400,000 for this fiscal year. And so if you can imagine, their construction will happen pretty quickly. And then there'll be a pretty good lag between when their next payment would be available to them. So Mary had already asked, I think, she had talked to us about it initially, at least, about maybe making some modifications to the agreement to allow that money to be released a bit earlier. All the infrastructure has to be reviewed and approved by the city inspectors, has to be built to our standards, you know, so it's not a question of building it to the standard, it's a question of, you know, just when is that funding going to be released. So I imagine next
It
month.
doesn't put us in any kind of jeopardy to release it early, does it?
No, it does not. I'm really excited, and I'm sorry to say it's the last thing we're going to talk about today is what finance has to tell you. So,
Okay.
and that's it.
Do we have to, if we want to, so would it take an amendment to the agreement to be able to release the funds before the start of next fiscal if they hit that 400,000 and need their final reimbursements before?
Yeah, that's a pretty substantial change, so it would take an amendment to the agreement. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's it for me.
Thank you.
Yep.
Questions? Nope, I don't hear any. Thank you, Michael.
And out next month, Celeste had asked about the ICSC workshop, so let me put together something and I'll have it for next month.
Well, if you want to just get up and say, I had a great time and I met some good number of people. I hate to put more things on your
dozens and dozens of people. I met with the owners of the mall. I met with prospective tenants for new retail.
You had to go out of town to meet them?
Huh? I did. I had to go to Dallas, and trust me, that part of the job I get paid for. A lot of the rest of it, I like doing it, and I do it anyway. That one is negotiating with everybody on, triple net lease this and that. And I'm like, just bring your IKEA to my town. That's what I want you to do. I offer margaritas and tacos. Those are my favorite things to offer.
So were you sitting at a booth and people came to talk to you?
No, we're talking about doing that next year. We never had a booth, but it's a great way to do it, and it's not too much more than the ticket price. It's $1,000 to have a booth versus $650 for a single ticket, and you get one entry with that. So, I think the juice is worth the squeeze to do that next time. But yeah, no, most of the time last 10 years I've walked around there and shaken hands and done all that stuff, kissing babies and things. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna stop.
Okay. All right.
All right, good evening. Okay, so we changed up some stuff for you so that things would be a little bit more clear and not so convoluted. But hopefully you got your December financial packet. Did we ever send that out? Well, we're going to update you through January though. So, okay, so this here looks different to you because this is only the sales tax bond activity. And basically we're just looking at it as bond dollars, and those projects, quality of life projects, are their own thing. So we're going to take those out and keep them separated from the operational activities in dollars. So on this chart, you're going to see we set a budget of what we expected for the bond proceeds to come in at, their investment earnings through the year, and the project expenses. And so you have another column next to that, which is fiscal year 24 activity, because we closed on these bonds in December of 23. So all of fiscal year 24 has already happened. We did have to do an arbitrage entry. Basically, if we're investing some of this money, it's sitting in a pool and investing money monthly anyways. And there is a potential arbitrage penalty that we would have to pay if we earn way too much more than what we were paying into the interest of the bonds. So that
Can you
was,
say that one more time?
Yeah.
We would have to pay a penalty
For making too much money?
for making.
yes, yes. If you earn more investing these dollars that you received as a loan, and it's more than what you're paying into interest on the bonds, there's a potential for an arbitrage penalty. It's a very long calculation. It wouldn't be due for 5 years or so. So it can be drawn down. They take the first 3-year period of the project expenses, calculate those into it, factor a ton of things, and they'll determine how much we owe. As of right now, the calculation was $302,000 that we owed on the earnings we got in '24.
But it could potentially come down.
Correct.
Because they prorate it over those 5 years.
Yes.
Or look at it over 5 years.
Yeah. So the color columns to the right are fiscal year '25 activities that have already happened, and we'll condense this month over month or quarter by quarter. That way it's not so much on a page. But we're reporting out January '25, the yellow column there. I just want to talk you through this so you get used to this format. And then you have your last gray column, which is all activities from the day of closing all the way through January of '25 on the bond proceeds and the expenditures that have happened so far. If you take a look at your right chart, your cash analysis there, so basically in your EIC tax pool revenue bond account, you have a total of $17.9 million sitting in that account. If you take a look at the big chart and the last gray row, it shows your net cash balance of $17,603,000. That's because we have reduced that number available cash by that arbitrage liability that we've booked. Basically, all in all, your bond proceeds, your $20 million in proceeds minus your current project expenses that have happened through '25, you have $18,673 left to spend on the projects. And then we separated out there on the very last portion, your interest earnings less that arbitrage. We are going to pay arbitrage penalty when and if it comes due strictly out of the earnings on the bond proceeds, the investment earnings, I apologize. So if we take that out, you have $887,000 that's just out there right now. We don't want to use it. We're going to kind of restrict it, wait till we know what we have to pay, and then you can decide if we want to put that towards anything else. At that time, those monies can be used for whatever else you decide to do. It doesn't have to be strictly bond stuff. Basically, those are your earnings.
It can go back into our general fund.
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's good news.
But,
There.
so let's speak to that part real quick, because that interest can be done that way, but the other piece, the 20
Right.
million itself, you got, is that
Coming
further in
up.
there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right, cool, we'll get into that.
Okay, so
Chunk of change right there.
It makes the arbitrage worth it.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, we'll take it.
you've earned 1.1 million so far, and we've set aside 300,000, so 800,000 positive. With your bond proceeds, the only other investments we have out there is one commercial paper we purchased at the end of October, and that will mature in July. So you'll have $2 million coming back into that cash balance, but it's still all allocated. It's just unused money at the moment for your bond expenses.
So, and you may be speaking to this, but I'm going off of what Michael and Dalton were saying. When we're looking at our cash flow projections, is that going to be part of what you talk about?
Yes,
Okay. Then
so
I
when
won't.
you're making investments, that cash is going out the door because we have to buy the investment. But as it matures and comes back into you, that's available cash again to you. And we're taking all that into account as for your cash flow liquidity needs. Basically, where you have dollars available, we're holding investments to maturity because we want to earn as much as it possibly can. But your money's not gone. You may look like you have a lesser balance right now, but it's going to come back eventually. Right. On to the debt covenants of the bond. So these were all the questions y'all had asked back in December, basically on the 8515 spin down. So basically, per the bond ordinance and tax requirements, 85% of the original proceeds must be spent within 3 years, and then the remaining 15% within 5 years. So if you have savings on that, and projects come in less than that, the remaining dollars can only be spent per the ordinance and the way it was written on parks and park facilities, like projects, basically. So we cannot reallocate the savings to your general fund pot. It has to be paid on these quality of life type projects or parks and park facilities. And then there was one more question, just kind of trying to get an understanding of what debt service coverage ratio is. So when you closed on the bonds, you had a debt service coverage ratio of 3.43 times. Basically, you could pay your debt service 3.43 times over the required amount. And that formula there is your available cash balance plus any annual revenues that are coming in minus any operating expenses, less depreciation, which you don't have any because you don't technically own anything, and then divide that by your debt service for the year. So right now, those are just all things we take into consideration as far as where we want our cash balances to be. We really don't have a policy where we were trying to stay at the 25% of your operating expenditures, but also taking into account debt service coverage ratio at any time if you were to issue debt again. Make sure we're fulfilling all the specifications. A 1.5 times is preferable on your debt service coverage ratio. So I did a quick little calculation just to see what you're at on your operating. This isn't taking into account your bond funds. This is going to be all your operational cash. So you have $4.1 million starting at the beginning in cash at the beginning of fiscal year 25. And you're going to bring in, hopefully, $5.2 million in your interest income and sales tax revenue. And then you have some investments that are tied up, $4 million in cash. So that brings you up to, what, $13 million. And then you take out your operational expense of $577,000, your debt service of $2.5 million, and then you have some PAYGO projects already on the books, which is all your Lennar and Habitat projects. That's $4.9 million. So you have a remaining $2.5 million, which is 2 times your debt service coverage ratio.
So you want it 1.5 and higher, is what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
So we're well within
Safe
that.
zone.
Yes. Alrighty. Any more specific questions on the revenue bonds? So with us taking those out, it's going to make your operational, it's going to make you feel a little bit more comfortable with your cash balances. So we're going to show you your operational stuff in just your normal format that we typically show you. I'm going to go through this. So looking at January, your sales tax came in at $400,372. And that's almost flat with last January. It was barely up 0.5%. Year to date makes you $1.5 million, and we're still a little bit behind by $69,000. February sales tax came in, however, last Friday, and it was up substantially, 24%. It came in at $601,000. However, there was a very large audit payment of $215,000, and then some future period payments of $90,000. So if we take those out, last year had some future period payments also, but not as much. I think we'll still be up 3%. So, but again, this was the month of December sales, which is holiday time. So we'll see that those large payments come in February most years. But it was still up. And once we get that report, we'll dissect it to see who the larger players were and whatnot. Your interest revenue, so this is $32,426 for the month, and that is, be mindful, that's just your short-term investments that we took out of your operational cash and your taxable funds that are in your balance. So year-to-date earnings, $102,000, and that puts you ahead of estimate by almost $40,000. So one thing I was worried about on investment income is basically we can stop investing so that we can make sure we have plenty of cash. However, we did set a budget for ourselves, and it's not, it's not going to make or break us, but we're something we still work towards month over month. So we're just going to pace that and go slowly. You're already almost at your budget. Budget is $153,000. You're at $102,000, and we still have 7 more months left in the fiscal year.
If there's some project that comes along that EIC feels like they really want to fund, we could choose not to reinvest so that we have liquid.
You're correct.
So I just want to hammer that point home. So when we brought you your 10-year cash flow analysis, that didn't take into consideration $4 million worth of investments, essentially. So there was $990,000 in one cash investment, 1 million in another, and 1.9 in another. Because it's not cash to the accountants. It's a liability. It's
Not
how
in
they
the
book
moment.
it, right? But what we were explaining, this is, accountants, attorneys, engineers, right? There's the math that makes sense to them, and then there's the math that makes sense to all of us, that don't understand all that. And so that was a really big kind of aha moment. I was like, does everybody on the board understand that while the cash
People
flow
get the cash
analysis
flow
says you have $1
analysis.
million cash, we didn't take into account the $4 million. So to that extent, when you get to 27 and we showed $1 million in cash, well, technically, yes, because $4 million of that was in an investment.
Also,
I
with
mean, but a fairly liquid investment.
No,
No.
liquid-ish, not like TextPool is liquid where you can pull it out
Uh-huh.
and it provides a lesser return.
So what are the typical timelines on our investments? I know you're laddering in that, but.
yeah, so our investment policy allows us to go up to 9 months on commercial paper. We can go up to 3 years on agencies and securities, but typically with what all you have going on, I probably wouldn't want to go out more than 18 months on anything. But a lot of what we saw on the good yields lately were the commercial paper. So we're only holding 6 to 9 months at a time on majority
I
of
was
your
gonna say,
investments.
if we are so tight on our liquid cash, that having that smaller timeline, just in case something came along to be able to pull those funds out. But
And that's in a couple of years, I think we're good for this year and next year, wasn't it? Maybe we got tied in the 2026.
We're going to get to the cash flow on the next
Okay.
section here, so you'll see what you truly have.
What is that TextPool rate right now?
TextPool is at a 4, I had it here somewhere,
4.25.
Yeah, if you go back one slide, I think you had it there.
453.
So I think, and we'll get into the policy discussion of all this later, but this was the direction of the board.
yeah,
Invest that money, which then ties it up.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, and so, but I think it was just kind of a confusing standpoint to, just clarifying that piece, right? Because, it is held, it's your savings account that you can't really hit. But in theory, if one of them is coming due and it's $1.9 million coming due in December, let's say, and somebody does come to you with an ask, you guys could say, well, we don't have money for you now. But in theory, we have 10
When this
months from
one
now,
matures.
we'll have this money available to you, and,
How we wanna spend it.
there's significant options for you to consider, so, this really, that was really good news.
Right.
And right now, since the rates have been so great, we have been buying and maturing in the reinvesting, maturing and reinvesting. So the money was tied up. But
But that's also what we wanted you to do,
yes,
because that's what we directed you to do as well. To
Right.
maximize.
correct. So, on your statement activities down in your expenditure section, just normal routine monthly stuff, 17,000 City of Kerrville contract, your second quarter KDC contribution went out for 85,000, and then your monthly debt service of 213,000. And then down on your projects, we have the Travis Street pump station upgrades, small payment went out for 2,200, and then Habitat is moving for 178,000. So all in all, with that maturity that came in on the investment, you had a net change in position of 935,000.
Karina, can you highlight, Greg had mentioned something earlier about 61%.
Yeah, I believe it was like 48%, so I feel like he was recalling back the conversation we had when we were in workshop going to issue the revenue bond. So existing expenses and compared to revenues coming in, it was close to 50% of our revenues that were tied up, basically.
Right, but he said 60%, I thought that was high.
He said 61, yeah, that was a little high.
Julie said 52.2%. And
Now
that
we're producing a report that you could send out to him and all of us so that we can see that.
Look at your budget, we can put your debt and your regular operating expenses and show you the variance, yeah. It's just,
Yep.
that's basic.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, let's do a follow-up on that.
Looking at some
And
different
that
numbers.
definitely has changed, obviously, now that we have new debt on the book and all that, so.
So we're looking at this number, the 2.559 on the budget line.
Yes.
That's our debt
Compared
service
to,
compared to annual revenues of 5 point.
Correct.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
5.1 in the budget.
Yes. I'll send you something.
Gotcha.
Okay, here, so onto your cash flow. Your first column down at the bottom has your ending cash balance in your operating pool account of almost $5.2 million. And we have taken out all the bond-funded projects and updated sales tax and where we think we're gonna be on your PAYGO projects. So if you look at that September 2025 final cash balance is $4.9 million. But if you look up on you have two investment maturities coming in, one in April for $2 million and one for $3 million in July it is. So that's five more $1 million coming back into that. But I was like, well, I don't want to just stop investing. We'll probably invest, $1
Yeah,
million.
so it's just not showing as, it's, yeah.
Right. It doesn't just completely wash out. So if we add in that back in, you're back to $6.9 million at the end of this fiscal year. So we just got to know what's coming up, what we plan to do, and we'll invest around that. All right, any questions on that?
So it still might be good as we're exploring, how we want to think about this ask from the city, if we had like a 5-year projection, because it seemed like it got tight several years out.
Right, I need to take out, because we did have it all together, bond-funded projects and all, so I just want to split out operations, and really that's really all we need to look at. Your
just the
projects
operations.
that's
Because
that.
it takes care of itself.
Correct.
The $20 million bond fund all takes care of itself, so we don't really have to have that in the debt service and stuff like that.
Now, in
Not
your
for
year-end
this.
financials, though, you're gonna see it come
Yeah.
on in the act, we
Right.
can't get around that. So these monthly ones will give you that.
Sound good? Alrighty, and just your regular financial analysis, it shows your cash balance in your pool account, your short-term investments you hold. You do have one investment that's maturing in the next fiscal year, which is October 15th of 25. So right now, you have an asset value of almost $9.2 million. And then projects down on the bottom, what we've paid out and remaining funds for each of those projects. And then your sales tax revenue over there, the comparison month or year over year and budget to estimate, or budget estimate to actuals.
So I was thinking that y'all did flat. You went flat from last year on your sales tax, and we're still underneath that by averaging, I guess, 7%. Underneath what was last year's?
14. Yeah, she's looking at the. Yeah, so we went 3% below. So our budget this year is $5.1 million. So it dropped it down almost by $100,000 from our original proposal. Yeah, we're still a little slightly under. So we're behind $69,000 right now compared to our budget estimate. And that's historical month over month of what we think we should bring in.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right now, interest is, yes, slightly making up the difference, but we don't want to count on that always.
Okay.
I will get you your 5-year or 5, maybe 10-year forecast with only the operational expenses and revenues, so you can see clearly show your cash balances, and we can do that analysis of your expenditures compared to your revenues. Alrighty. Do I feel better
So, yeah, I think we'll be.
about the cash?
We can be all right.
Yeah, I think y'all made a good change by separating those out.
Okay.
It can get confusing when it's grouped together.
Uh-huh.
We look at it all the time, so.
Still clustery, but better.
I didn't say great, so we're gonna be all right.
Just gotta keep those investments in mind.
Yeah, I think
Tied
that's.
up, they're not going.
Yeah.
So we do have the James Avery's intersection contract that may be coming soon. That's $150,000 already to count for. And I don't know what else.
Yeah,
maybe
we're
down
just
the line.
waiting for their donation agreement from TxDOT, which is, they're still waiting on it, which has been a long time, so.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Yep. It's- Yes, sir.
Yep. Not blaming you, just saying.
No, I'm trying to say nice things about the state.
Hard to do.
You stopped after you. Yeah.
Yes,
We
sir.
got the point.
We better finish this meeting before somebody says something they shouldn't say.
We're all gonna pass out from.
Is everybody ready, and have we talked about everything we need to talk about?
Yes.
That's it.
All right, we're adjourned.
Oh, my goodness.